Can I ask everyone to take a seat? Then we start the meeting. We start, unfortunately, a little bit later, and I think that we are to blame for that because we had an open bar yesterday night, and people need some extra time to wake up, so I understand completely. Well, from my side, a very warm welcome to Delft, to NEN, and to the No Fear Standardization workshop. I hope you enjoyed the canal tour yesterday night as well. At least I did. For me, I learned a lot of new things about the city that I'm working in. I also hope you enjoyed the dinner and, of course, the drinks, but not too much, because we need you fully focused and energized for today's workshop, because we have prepared a very interesting program for you and amazing speakers who will tell you all about standardization and why it's important for healthcare professionals. So my name is Lennart de Waard. I work at NEN, the Dutch Standardization Institute, and NEN develops standards for the Dutch market, and we're also mandated by the Dutch government to represent the Netherlands at the European and the international standardization organizations that are CEN, CENELEC, and ISO, IEC. With me from NEN are here as well Okeja Prent, also participating in the project, Leander van Splunter, who is working on PPE, and also our manager healthcare will be joining us later. That is Stephanie Jansen, who is also participating in the panel. Before we go to the workshop and the content of the workshop, I would like to invite Professor Della Corte to say a few words of welcome. Professor Della Corte is the head of the emergency department of a hospital and also a full professor at the University of Eastern Piedmont, but I think most importantly, he's also the chair of our program. So we switch to this microphone, Professor Della Corte.
Okay, thank you very much, Lennart. It's a real pleasure that we are here in Delft. I like it, the town very much, and yesterday the boat on the trip on the boat that we had on the canals was very interesting and appealing, and also gave us the occasion to spend some time with all our friends. We are quite close to the end of the project. It will be finished in May in Brussels. So I start to have some nostalgia about the project itself, because it gave us the occasion to meet new friends and to reinforce friendship within friends that were already working together with us. So thank you very much for everything you have done. Standardization is something that is very sometimes is appealing, but is the dream to know what standardization is. So it was very important for us to organize this today's meeting here in Brussels and in Delft, and we are sure we will improve our knowledge about the standardization. So thank you very much for everything you have done in the preparation of this meeting, and also for the help that you gave us during the project. So, and thank you for your presence of you all here. It was a very important that you were here to listen and to improve our knowledge as well. So thank you very much again, and we will be here to hear you.
Yeah. Thank you. Oh, I don't need this anymore. Thank you very much for these words of welcome. Then we go to the next slide. That is, I think, just a picture of me 4 years ago. So a lot of things have changed in the years. Oh, you don't see anything. Let me try it again. I'm not sure if this is working then. No. Then we have a technical issue. But I see that Brent is on the rescue. Thank you, Brent. Thank you. Okay, we got the presentation working again. Sorry for the interruption. We go to the next slide, and that is a few housekeeping rules that I've put on the slide. I think there will not be any surprises to anyone. So we're having a hybrid meeting, meaning that we have people both here in the room and of course in the call. So we need to be conscious because we value the face-to-face and the virtual participants equally. So here in the room you need to use a microphone, and we have one microphone here. I can give it to you if you have a question. You can raise your hand and we try to come back to you. We also have a throwable microphone over there. For the people in the virtual room, I thought that there was also the functionality to raise your hand there and to speak, but we don't, so sorry about that. So you can ask your question in the chat, and then the chat will be monitored and we try to come back to your question in the meeting. Further, a recording will be made of this workshop, and pictures will be taken for promotional purposes. So if you have an issue with that, no problem, but let us know and we can cut you out of the promotional material. Further, we try to make this an interactive session. We use Slido for that. You can see the login and the code on the screen. So some presenters have prepared some questions for you. And if you go to slido.com and enter the code on the screen, and it's also on your program, you can answer the questions online. Then we have a coffee break scheduled and also a lunch break. The lunch break will be here in the room. Then I also have a special announcement to make because we have a very special guest during the lunch break. And I think for our non-Dutch colleagues, this will require some context. Once a year, St. Nicholas visits the Netherlands together with his loyal helper, Piet. And he brings gifts to all children who have not been naughty. If you have been naughty, he will put you in a sack and take you back to Spain. Don't ask me why Spain. But today is the celebration for the Dutch, let's say for the children of the NEN employees downstairs. And although St. Nicholas and his helper only visit Dutch and of course Belgian children, he has made an exception and also bring a visit to us here in the lunch break. So that is for us. That's for us also a way to give you a taste of Dutch culture and share this celebration with you. We also have a traditional let's say, sweet that we'd like to share with you. It is over there. It's a chocolate letter, and that is a traditional gift that is given to children during the St. Nicholas celebration. So you can feel free to take one of the chocolate letters home or enjoy it directly. Now I would like to just give a very, very short update of the Novia project. I think most of us are already familiar with the project, so I'll keep it brief. Novia is an acronym, and I have to look it up every time, for Network of Practitioners for Emergency Medical Systems and Critical Care. And the goal of the project is to build a pan-European network of stakeholders related to emergency services, so that our first responders, health practitioners, hospitals, suppliers, policymakers, and also decision makers. And the purpose is to talk to each other, to learn from each other, and to identify common needs and gaps, and also draft lessons learned. The project further has 3 pillars: on acute care of the patient, on operations in security-related incidents, training education of personnel and volunteers. And I'm going to pause here about the project. If you want to know more about it, I would advise you to talk to anyone here in the room, because there are a lot of people from the project present at the moment. This is just a slide showing all the participants to the project, 18 in total, hospitals, research organizations, etc. Then the objectives of the workshop, and why are we here today? The purpose of the workshop is, first of all, to inform you about what standardization actually means to you, and what does standardization mean in daily practice, and also what is the added value of standardization. Now, what we also want is to give you the instruments to know how you can participate in standardization, and very importantly as well, to entice you to participate. So that is what we are working on today. Oh, and I also give an example over here of good standardization and bad standardization. Jaap, who is up next, told me that he used the same example. I don't think that's a bad thing, because it's a very good example. You see what we don't want, that is the various plugs, and what we want is one universal USB-C adapter. So it's a very visual, I think, example of standardization. Now we go to the agenda. We have, I think, a very interesting agenda for you, but also a very full agenda. So that means that we need to be conscious of the time. So we may have to be a little bit strict here, but I think we're gonna manage. So if you talk about time management, my time here is up. Thank you all for coming here. And of course, many thanks as well to the speakers who will be joining us. And then I would like to introduce the first speaker, who knows a lot more about standardization than myself. That is Okeaap Prent. Okeaap, come to the, how do you call it? To the stage. Okeaap is a standardization consultant at NAN since 2017. His work is mostly centered around about machinery and the Hyperloop, especially also in relation to legislation. And Okeaap will tell you more about the basics of standardization.
Thank you, Leonard. Thank you. Yes, so my time frame is a rough 7 minutes, so I'll go through it very short. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to show you a general introduction about the area of standardization. Because for me, of course, the first question is, okay, what are we actually roughly talking about? In order to go through that specific topics, I'm going to specify slightly on what are the basics, what is the added value, because that's of course something that everybody always wants to know. I can do some standardization, but how does it work? Where is the added value? And then especially from the perspective of course, the healthcare industry, of the healthcare market. Initially, I'm going to start slightly with some, well, let's just say different aspects or different concepts of standardization, just to show you where you can actually find standardization. I always love this picture. It's very busy, it's very full, but just gives you a very good idea. What is a standard? What do we use it for? I think this picture shows it quite clearly. We use it for roughly everything. Everybody who is now actually arrived at this specific location, came here or by train, or for example by car. Well, for both of those specific activities, you already used countless of standards in order to get to your queuing location. The train rails, for example, though they are not all everywhere the same, due to some, let's just say, other topics, are already standardized. When you fill up your car with gas, benzene, so the 95 ongelood, as we call it here in the Netherlands, is actually literally a definition stated in a standard. A4, the paper, exactly the same thing. All of the small cards in your wallet are exactly the same size, just to make it so that it's very easy to interoperable use of those cards, so that the person who, let's say, innovates slightly does not need to think about the basics or the general agreements that you already made. That makes it a lot easier to achieve and let's just say, to achieve your goal and to get forward. Imagine developing a new printer and have to think about every single step, even about the size of paper, quality of paper, whiteness, etc., etc. It just gets too much. Well, this might be your house, doesn't know, but this just gives you a general example. Okay, so I just explained there are countless of standards, so how do we try to organize it? I took mobility, as that is something that everybody always uses every day. On mobility on itself, we have already countless of specific NEN communities, European communities, focusing on aspects of mobility and try to standardize those specific topics. So, though the world of standardization is quite wide and broad, it does not necessarily have to be that you have to take the aspect of standardization for your entire field. You can specify. For example, if you're a drone expert, you can go into the specific committee focusing on the standardization aspects related to drones. If you extrapolate this to, for example, the healthcare sector, you have the same aspects. Different areas of standardization are targeted in different specific groups. Okay. I'll come back to that, of course, as well. Well, then the basics. Just go back a little bit. So we got countless of standardization examples already in this room. We got multiple small groups thinking about aspects and thinking about specific standards. Well, okay. How does that then work, and what is the goal that we try to achieve? I always like this picture. Initially, back in the day, I think roughly 100 years ago, we had no standard. Everybody did something different. So when one, well, let's just say a truck driver, okay, 100 years ago we didn't have a truck, but just bear with me. One truck driver crossed the border and went to the different road. It was virtually impossible for him to make his same project well, arrive and actually work in the country just around the corner. When you go back further and further, of course, the scale becomes smaller and smaller. When we go into the future, it gets bigger and bigger. So what did we try to do? We tried to remove those trade barriers, of course, not only trade, but the same for innovation, etc., in order to achieve a very more accessible method of going forward. A German car or a French or a Spanish car could enter every single entity or location way easier. With that goal achieved, of course, what is then a good example of this? The same one Leonard already showed. So I'll skip this one. Okay, so now we have countless examples what we try to achieve. But what are the core principles of how we try to achieve it? Because that is, of course, essential. You can already, of course, get a little bit of a feel, okay, if you write a standard, and it could be that important that I just sketched, might not be, of course, but is that then not to a certain degree also a little bit challenging or, well, I just say up for some influence? Well, standardization tries to use the three principles which are actually the basic principles. A standard, as it is not legislatively binding, it is voluntary to a certain degree. Of course, it can be harmonized, so it gives you a presumption of conformity with the legislative framework which is connected. I'll come back to that in a bit. But in essence, a standard is not an obligated document. It is very, very useful, and if you don't use it, and it is there, and you have an accident, the judge is going to ask you, why didn't you use the best practice case? But in essence, the core principles that we use make them also so powerful. It's all parties concerned. It is not just one entity that makes a standard. For example, if I make a standard about healthcare equipment, let's just say A, just from my perspective, it might not be effective for the person who is actually using it or creating it from the other side. So the consensus is essential, all parties are concerned, and the project getting to the end result needs to be transparent. Well, we build in some steps there, and I think my colleagues, or at least my co-speakers, and me will go through it a little bit. So, now we know what the core principles are. What is happening in every country? Of course, we are a mixed group here. We have Dutch, we have English, we have every single country, not even in Europe, but also from abroad. Very happy to, of course, have everybody here. So what happens in your country? I just take the Netherlands as an example. Every single country has a national standardization body, which is, as Leonard already called, indicated by the European or your government to be the representative of that country. So, in the Netherlands, for example, it's NEN, it's us, and we participate in European standardization activities, which are organized through CEN or CENELEC. CEN, mechanical, just put it like this, CENELEC, electrotechnical. Doesn't go into that too deeply, but just to give you a short explanation. Globally, we also have another one, of course, that is ISO, and that is from, just in order to make sure that even abroad and broader than Europe, we still work together. So then what is happening nationally? Your national interests are represented by your national standardization body or the experts that are delegated from your national standardization body. So if you have a meeting with your national group, you collaborate on the content, you give your standpoint, and it is up to your national standardization body or designated expert, of course, if somebody is participating, to represent your standpoint. Once again, on European level, consensus is the goal. Okay, so nationally we have groups, they work together, create a standpoint. How do we organize that? The Netherlands is organized by NEN. Europe, you have the same thing, standardization committees with experts from different levels. Every national standardization committee contains a chairman, a secretary, and the national experts. They together, by consensus, preferably create one specific topic, then they go to a European or ISO or another specific activity. There again, you have a chairperson, secretary, delegates, of course. They work together on the content of the standard, and they go forward and try to work and to create one specific topic. Now it gets a little bit, let's just say, technical and maybe not that interesting, but we'll get to the practical added value in a little bit. One more sheet. So, if we have the concept of all those standards, we have your national country who is representing your interest on the European scale, then where does actually your real government come in? Because standards are written by experts, you for example, if you are from the field of work or at least from a business side, to what is the legislative framework? So how does that work when you connect it with actual law, because law is what we need to follow. It has to be safe, that's in the law, and then we, through standards, and of course as experts here, try to operationalize that in saying, okay, how can we do that? So I just put it here on the 3 different levels. I'll just take the European level, because everybody here roughly is European. Same thing, of course, for the World Trade Organization. The European Commission writes law. It states this has to be done in this, for example, method, or gives specific target groups. It writes a directive or a regulation, of course. The national government implements it, and then it becomes law, and you have to do it. Standardization requests are written. How can we operationalize these specific activities? So that's where the link comes in. And that's where it starts to get a little bit more legislative, of course. But by writing law as a goal, you can try to make the goal the legislative target that you need. Sometimes, of course, you need essential health and safety requirements. But by interacting with standards together, you can achieve, let's just say, a hybrid, or let's just say a collective world. So the law states you need to do this. In order to operationalize this and make it possible that the market also has some general idea, how can we do that? The law, so let's just say European Commission says, okay, we need to write a standard or request a business practical actual example from the standardization world. For example, it needs to be safe in this specific area. How can we operationalize that? The SEN committee comes in and writes a standard, which is then used as a presumption of conformity. Using that standard makes it much easier to make your product acceptable. So now you start to see, to a certain degree, the European Commission law, European standards, okay, that's all European, but okay, that's why we have the national specific committees. By joining a national committee, you can indirectly influence the state of play, or, as I always like to call it, the rules of the game. How and what do you need to achieve? What I always try to explain. Okay, if you want to have any questions on that, please come back to me, of course, later. Technical committees, same thing. Okay, role of SAN and ISO, it is the harmonization, removing technical trade barriers, and the internal collaboration. Roughly the same pillars, but with a specific, slightly, of course, a different target group. I made a very interesting story about the technical background and how it works. Now let's see, okay, do we have some practical examples? Because that, of course, makes it a lot more easy and a lot more, well, puts it in a lot better perspective. I went to our national stakeholders and I asked them, okay, can you give me some statements, or at least quotes, or some best practice cases? This is not something I wrote. This is something that one of the healthcare facilities wrote and gave to me, and said, okay, you can share this with all the practitioners that you find as examples. So by the use and participation in the standardization world, this is what they achieved. Some of the examples, of course, are standards that we all know and that we all see, and that we did. So they improved the safe quantitative healthcare through easier implementation of the Healthcare Quality Act that we have in the Netherlands. So they use standards to make it a lot easier to actively get interacted. The quote in the end, of course, is also a very interesting one. So we had a healthcare facility. I just made it a little bit more geranic. Oh, sorry. In order to make it clear. Okay. But then a second real-world example is from a supplier's perspective, because once again, there are multiple stakeholders involved in the specific activities. He wrote down the steps why he used it and what his gain was and what his target group was by using the standardization aspects from his perspective. So we tried to align his, let's just say, product with the standards and with the quality that we have on the European level. By gaining a product which is standardized and at least to a certain level, he tried to use it as, and tried to put it in the market as an A-level product, of course, making it very easy for other partners who wanted to have a specific product to see, okay, this at least has a specific base, and it makes it a specific quality base as well. It makes it a lot easier to, of course, get the specific item that you wanted to. Another example that we had, an example of the national legislation and the application of standards, is the Dutch Regis. It's a law on the electronic data exchange between patients and hospitals, and of course every single doctors that we have. Well, I'm not an expert on a specific field, but at the moment, as far as I know, the main goal is that we use the data streams that is supplied by the patient, so that all the different aspects were correctly and not that, how do you say it, that digitally also digitally challenged. One of the NENs, that's a national example that we have that worked quite well, is of course the 7510. That's it doesn't matter about the number, but you can find it back. It is on the information system management for healthcare. So there you have the collaboration. We have the healthcare, the wages, the legislation, how you have to have a specific technological base for your data management. We operationalized it by the NEN 7510, and it became the basis for data sharing. So what can we achieve then? Going back all the way to the beginning of the presentation, a lot of things are already standardized. I think most of the things that you, to a certain degree, well, are used to or just at least basically worked, are to a certain degree influenced by standards. We now know how it roughly works. My colleagues, of course, my co-presenters will go into that a little bit as well. We know where they do it, we know how we can participate to a certain degree, and we know what the main goals can be, and we have some practical examples of what is effective. I got a few slides about the process. I think I'll skip them because we're a little bit in specific time frames. But one of the questions I always take, why does standardization take that long? As we have already indicated, you need to take all the pillars into account. We need to incorporate all the stakeholders. We need to create a consensus. And we need to have all the specific steps done well in order to make sure that everybody is consulted. And that's one of the things we have. So a rough time frame of developing a standard is actually written here. Initially, it takes, let's say, depending on a topic, at least a year, up to 3 years to develop a standard. That is the general basis that I wanted to give you in order to make sure that we can approve or at least continue into the next presentations and have a little base about, okay, what are standards, where do we use them for, and how at least are they well, developed. So that's it for me. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, or well, I'll give you our nice box and see how that happens. I think the idea is that you can catch it and
throw the box.
That's the idea, yeah.
You described your decision-making as a technical process on practicality, yes, safety, quality. But I imagine there are immense financial interests and commercial interests. Do you manage to have a national and especially international level, how do you avoid the political discussions driven by financial interests?
What we try to do, I'll keep the presentation here. So what we try to do on European level is, of course, one of our colleagues is going to go into that on the basis of the TC 391, if I'm correct, yeah. What we try to do is every single stakeholder that participates has exactly the same added value, has exactly the same weighted vote. So as you need to achieve a consensus in order to continue your process, two partners who cannot reach a consensus, even though one has a lot more money than the other one, can still block the process. So just being a bigger partner with more money does not necessarily furthers the project. Am I saying that correctly? One of our experts on the TC 391.
Well, that's a very good question indeed, because you see, standardization is one of the front line of the economic war.
Please use the box a little closer because
my expertise is, I mean, in a TC, we still use policies, so you don't want them to interfere in what you do. Of course, they're here, and it's a good thing that they're here because we have to have discussions. But sometimes when they try to push things, sell their specifications, and we don't think it's a good idea, you see, expertise breaks it up. I've seen some consultants, lobbyists, people trying to push their ideas, and one or two very experienced firefighters saying, no, this doesn't work, I tell you why, and that was the end of the discussion. So I would urge you, if you have an interest, to participate, to be there to say, okay, this is not relevant, because then, you know, they will understand they're not going to sell, so they will find something that suits you. It's very important, otherwise you will pay to adapt to what they do. So not sitting in the chair, not participating has a cost. It's a good investment to be there.
Please.
Hi. A question, in your process, everything finishes with the publication. Yes. But does it mean what the life stops or something? I give an example, for example, in what I know, let's say the mobile phone industry. They have 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, 6G, and it's a one standard. It's not 5, 6 different standards. It's what they call open standard. They just publish the release and they carry on working on the next one. So what's your attitude to this process? Yeah,
that's absolutely correct. So this is just the process of developing a standard. Immediately after, let's just say, point C, on the end of this specific sheet, a standard is, let's just say, accepted, published. It has a publication period of time before it needs to be revised, or at least checked if it's still compatible, of 5 years. After 5 years, every single standard written gets to a systematic review. What often happens, especially in the A2A20, which is a TC, I focus on Hyperloop, which is a very developing and high technological, still in advanced technology. What we're doing here is sometimes when we're even on this part of the standard, we already notice that the basis is already slightly, let's just say, outdated. So what often happens is by the end of the process, you can already start to make an amendment, you can already start to rewrite the standard, and that's actually not that uncommon. Yeah. So it is not necessarily a 5-year process, stop, and you need to start again, but this is just a process that you go through, and by the end of the process, you can start directly again with rewriting the standard. But the reason why we keep the process like this is if we don't do it like this, there will be a constant development. Because what we see is, especially in the first phase, you often get the development of the standard, and then by the end, you need to go through. The deadline, the roughly 8 months of the first period, is quite useful to make sure that by the end, people start to, okay, now we need to take a decision. Because unfortunately, people like to work through deadlines in that case.
Peter told me to do something good to say, enough is better.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Any more questions? If not, yeah, perfect. Throw the box, let's see what happens.
Yeah, let's see what happens.
Well, that happened indeed.
We saw what happened. It wasn't very successful. Okay, I just wanted to ask that standardization, to standardize anything is a very long process, yes. Takes years, and then, like you said, after 5 years you have to review at the EU level. Have you found that this impedes innovation? Because who would generate an idea, given the fact that they know it would maybe happen after so many years? Do you think that there are ways to mitigate this problem of idea generation and innovative ideas coming forward?
Absolutely.
That's my question, basically.
So, just to recap and to know if I understand the question correctly, what you're asking is, as this process that I show here is quite long, innovative processes are way quicker. So if I want to innovate, I want my standard tomorrow, or preferably yesterday. So that's a very good question, because that's something that's quite often asked. Developing a standard is not the only way to achieve an EU or a standardized document. So what you can do, for example, to a relatively short period of time, is write a technical report, or write let's just say, an MPR, or a SEN workshop agreement. We have opportunities of not a direct standard, but shorter documents. Those are not standards, but that's the basis which you can develop to a standard. So you have options there, but what often happens is, at the moment you start to innovate, and if you start with the innovation process parallel with the development of your standard, it does not necessarily need to mean that by the end of the innovation process you need to write the standard, and you of course, you start this process afterwards. So there are options there. What we do at the HSA 20, we actually are parallel developing standards with the legislation that still needs to be developed as well. So in order to make sure that we make sure that the things that in the innovative process are known and everybody is already doing, let's just write that down first. And if you start there, you can actually get quite some significant achievements.
That's perfect.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have to go to the next speaker with the eye on the time. I would like to invite you to save your questions for the panel discussion, because we have a panel discussion later. Thank you, Jaap. Okay, Jaap, before you leave, you also have a small present for every speaker, so also for you. It's a stroopwafel. As you're the first one, I'll just explain briefly what it is. It's a Dutch delicacy. A lot of people may know that Gouda is famous for the cheese, but there's one other thing that Gouda is famous for, and that's for the stroopwafels. So we got one for every speaker. Thank you for talking. Then I will introduce the next speaker. The next speaker, that is Henk van Houten. Henk, I understood that you were not on the program that has been circulated this morning. That is a mistake, because very important that you are here, and we'll talk about personal protective equipment. Henk van Houten is the Secretary General of the European Safety Federation, but I think for this company more important, the chair of the Sector Forum Standardization for Personal Protective Equipment. So Henk, if I can invite you to come for the front. We have the camera over here, so if you want the people in the call to see you as well, you have to stay on this spot. Thank you.
Microphone is working. Yep. So I'll try to stay here, and I suppose, yeah. Okay, so I've been asked to tell you a little bit about personal protective equipment and standardization. Well, if you would ask 2018, 2019 to a lot of people, especially also consumers, what does PPE mean? What is personal protective equipment? Nobody would probably, or only very few people would have known. Due to something happening early 2020, all of a sudden everybody was an expert in PPE. I can assure you, no. There were a lot of so-called experts that have no clue what they were talking about. But anyway, that's a different story. So, talking about personal protective equipment, just going to explain a little bit what we do with the European Safety Federation, who we are. The same for the PPE Sector Forum at Sensenelec. And then I'll give some examples what's happening in the Sector Forum, what are we discussing about, and what's happening in technical committees. You have to know for personal protective equipment, we do have a regulation on European level. So all in all, we have about 200 harmonized standards for PPE. So it's not just one standard, about 200. And we're developing continuously. And PPE, for those who would not know, I didn't include a slide with some pictures. Often I do it. But PPE, we're talking about earplugs, we're talking about respiratory masks, we're talking about safety glasses, but firefighter suits, CBRN suits, and so on. But also about your bicycle helmet, your high visibility vest, your shin protection when you're playing football or whatever. So it's not only professional, but also private use. So it's a huge variety of products, hence also 200 standards, of course, because we do have all those different products. So the European Safety Federation, we're an, you could say, sort of an umbrella organization set up in the early 90s. Why the early 90s? 89 publication, end of 89, publication of the first European directive on personal protective equipment. So national organizations that were working according to national law came to the conclusion, hey, if there's European law, and that was also the start for a lot of products, not all. Some were already working on European standardization, but for a lot of products, that was also the kickoff for European standardization. So it was important to have also a representative organization for the industry on European level. And that's how and why early 90s. So our first members are national organizations. You see their logos on the right. Apart from that, we also have some companies and some other industry stakeholders that can join our federation. What we do, we represent our sector, and we're focusing with our organization on the professional use. There's organizations like, for instance, FASI, the sporting good industry, that's focusing more on that part of the PPE and so on. But in that sense, we're looking more at the professional use, although some of our products end up in consumers anyway. So we represent our sector at the European institutes like the Commission, but also Parliament and so on, and also standardization, notified body system, market surveillance coordination, and so on and so on. Within Senelec, there's also what we call the PPE Sector Forum. That's an advisory group for the Sen and Senelec technical boards. And why is that? As I said, there's a wide variety of products in PPE. And because of the history and the good old system of everybody's in his little box, there are already, for starters, 7 technical committees directly developing standards for PPE. An example, the head is not the biggest part of the body. There's 4 technical committees working on PPE that you put on your head. There's one for respiratory, one for eye and face, one for hearing, and one for the head protection, the helmets, and so on. So that's already 4. Then you have another one for clothing and gloves, one for footwear, one for fall protect systems, and then you have Senelec, because they work on the electrical side. The technical committee on sporting goods developed some standards specifically for sports and so on. So there's quite a big number of technical committees working on PPE, but there is a common interest. We have the same legislation. So therefore, the sector forum was set up to try to harmonize a little bit on horizontal level what's happening in the different TCs. So that's one of the, or that's the biggest part of the membership of that group is indeed the representatives of the technical committees, typically chair and or secretary. And also what we also have in that group is stakeholder representatives on that level. For instance, the European Commission, in our case DG GROW, they will not go to individual technical committee meetings, because otherwise they would have almost a need for one full-time person to do all those meetings. But they do come to the sector forum meetings, and that's also the place where the technical committees can directly ask questions about, how do you see that? How do we have to interpret that? The same with the coordination of the notified bodies on horizontal level. And we also have some industry organizations, like ESF is one of the members of the sector forum. And that's how I ended up years ago as chairing that group. But we also have others. So we deal with horizontal issues. We're not talking about the standard for earplugs or for masks or whatever. No, we're really talking about horizontal issues, and what we try to do as well is try to see what's happening in the next years, what's coming, what are the developments, what do we need to look at in the next stages of the revision of standards. And what we also do for the sector is we have a link with other sector fora, because the good old days of the small boxes, forget it, it's not possible anymore. Even if you produce PPE or even if you use PPE, you don't only look at the PPE regulation anymore. You also have to take into account a whole set of other legislation, like REACH for starters, but also everything to do with sustainability. We also have occupational health and safety legislation. On the use side, we have to look at that, and so on and so on. So we do cooperate, and as chair, I'm participating in meetings from other sector fora, like the occupational health and safety, SABE, which is the environmental aspects, and then typically I follow the task group on circular economy. With the Sector Forum Health, we have contacts with the Sector Forum Security. I participate in their meetings, so that's also part of the job of the Sector Forum. So what we discuss in the forum, as mentioned, well, of course, the interpretation of the legislation. In 2016, we got a new regulation published, evolution of the directive we already had, but there were some consequences, and that's also the place where we then discuss, together with the Commission and other stakeholders, okay, this new legislation, this change in legislation, what is the impact on the standards? What do we need to do with the standards to keep them up to date with the legislation and harmonized again? Because as we have 200 harmonized standards, it's a big exercise, and actually before the regulation we had 300, we kicked out about 100. So it was also a moment of it's time to clean. And the reason for cleaning is that, for whatever reason, standards describing test methods had become harmonized in the past. Doesn't make sense, because in the end what you want is, you want requirements for products based on test methods, of course. So we kicked out all the ones that did not have product requirements or service requirements, which means we have already eliminated almost 100 standards from the list, which is already nice to have it a bit more concrete and clear. So, but we still have that many. Of course, we also have the system with the Haas consultants. Those of you who are familiar with the standardization process, I guess like everybody, you have a love-hate relationship with the Haas consultants. We can talk a full day about that. I'm not going to get into that, but that's also reality, and that's also where the Sector Forum has a role to play, because we can also be the connection to the strategy behind that. And then some things, as I mentioned, we're looking at the future. So years ago already, we started talking about, okay, smart PPE. There are developments in the market. What do we do with that in terms of standardization? How do you treat that? The same with sustainability. That's a quite important topic, of course, but how do you treat sustainability and standards? What do you do with that? What are the aspects we can do something about in standardization? So we're looking at that for the sector as a whole, and then try to give guidance to the specific technical committees so that they can implement those. And also an important one, and certainly also with this group, in some cases there's also combination of function. PPE function protecting the person wearing the product. Health and safety of that, that's the function of PPE. There are some products that also have a medical device function. We're looking at, to give you simple example, safety glasses with corrective lenses, PPE and medical device. You put orthopedic inlay soles in your safety shoes, PPE and medical device. And we're not going to talk about, not here, about masks and so on, which also, and clothing and used in the healthcare. So it's not only products used in the healthcare that have a combination medical device PPE, but also there, how do we deal with that? Because now the standards are developed completely separately, and as a manufacturer and as a user, if you're out of luck, you have contradicting standards, but that's your problem. It's not the problem of, that's not correct for standardization. We have to make sure that there is a harmonization, that things can work together. Also taking into account that the conformity assessment procedures behind are completely different in a medical device and in PPE, especially in products. Also important is cooperation with the coordination of the notified bodies, because they do apply standards in a lot of cases. So it's important to have their feedback, their experience need to be fed in into the standardization process. And we come to the conclusion that in some technical committees that works perfectly, and others a bit less. So we try to see, can we make it a bit more organized so that there is a clear procedure, that it doesn't depend on this person from the notified bodies knows this person in the standards committee, and they talk to each other. If you depend on that kind of relationships, if one of the two persons disappears, your relationship is broken. That cannot be the purpose. So we're also looking into that. And also a point that's always on the agenda, and I think also in the national standards bodies, how to involve experts in standardization, and especially young experts. We need them, because I don't know about you, but I'm not planning to work another 50 years. So we do need young blood all the time. We do need renewal. It's not only standards that need to be revised, it's also the experts that need to be updated and revised. So how do we try to do that? One of the things that we do with the sector forum, and that also has an impact on finding experts and attracting experts. We started organizing workshops already in 2015, 2016. So then it was really in Brussels on site. The first topic was smart PPE, where we brought people from whoever is interested in smart PPE. Let's sit together. What are the needs? What's happening in the market? What's going on? Where can standards help? Fruitful discussions, and then you have 60, 70, 80 people together in Brussels, so that's okay. Of course, due to COVID, we've all learned to work with online meetings. We had to. We organized a workshop on sustainability for PPE in 2021, in the spring. If we expected, if you do it live, 70, 80 people, we had 400 registrants, of which a good half actually participated and the rest then followed. The same, we had one almost 2 months ago, PPE medical device combination. We had around 250 participants online in that workshop. Lively discussion going on. So it also helps the sector to understand what's living, what's happening, what are the needs in terms of standardization. And it also allows people who are not yet involved in standardization to have a flavor and maybe say, oh, but that's a topic, I want to work on that. So that's always, it's also a way to recruit new experts. What's happening in the technical committees in PPE? Well, obviously, there's an evolution of the existing standards. It's already been mentioned, revision of standards on a continuous basis. We have some examples in our field where the final vote is almost conditional, where member states say, we will vote yes if there is an agreement to start a revision immediately. So that kind of things happen, and I'm sure it happens in other sectors as well. Not in the majority of cases, but it can happen. So it is a continuous process because, yeah, of course, materials change, but also the risks change. If you look at PPE, the way people in occupational use, but also in private use, the way people work, the way people live today is not the same as 20, 30 years ago. There's a lot of different things. Let's think about mobility. And electric cars, electric mobility brings new risks. What kind of PPE will be necessary? What are the risks? Are they covered by existing standards? And so on. So there's lots of things happening that need to be followed and that are followed by the technical committees and thus in. So you have a continuous evolution. What's also happening in the technical committees is that there's not only focus always on product standards or test methods, but also more like looking at the user. How do you select? How do you use the PPE in a correct way? Also looking at compatibility. As I mentioned, for the head, there's 4 technical committees. Yeah, but those products need to be compatible, otherwise you have a problem. If you need to wear a respiratory protection and safety glasses and that doesn't fit, yeah, it doesn't work. You're not protected anymore. So that kind of discussions are also continuously going on. I can assure you, not easy to standardize, but looking at that and trying to get at least guidance as well for employers, for users on how to deal with that, what to look at, how do you assess the compatibility, things like that. Something that's going on as well at the moment, and as a result of COVID, of course, well, I have to talk about masks, whether I like it or not. No problem with masks. But at some point, the European Commission, different directorate generals were asking different things to send concerning standards. We had the protective standards, which is DG GROW, that's behind. The surgical masks, the medical masks, DG Sante, and then you had DG Justice of all, because DG Justice is responsible for the general product safety legislation. That's why DG Justice is then saying, oh, we need masks for community face coverings and masks for children and transparent masks for the hearing impaired and. So, so that related to some initiatives. One of the initiatives was actually taken by the PPE Sector Forum. Yours truly saying, hey guys, 3 DGs in the Commission, 3 technical committees, because TC 248, which is textiles, was working on community face coverings, 205 medical devices, medical masks, 79 respiratory protection, the PPE, the FFP masks. Would it be possible to have the 3 DGs and the 3 TCs sitting at the same table, well, virtual table, and discuss what is actually needed in the market? And what are the questions? So managed to get that. It took several months to get to that point. But at least that was a first step in let's talk together and see where we have to go. And unfortunately, we need a lot more of that, and it's not always easy to get that done. But I can assure you that's on European level, but you have the same problem on national level, I'm sure. So, but one of the initiatives coming out of the COVID experience is that there is a clear realization that there is a need for masks that combine the medical function, the medical device function, meaning protecting the patient, the outside, and protecting the wearer himself, him or herself, so a combination PPE medical device. For some reason, I still don't understand why, but that's a completely different discussion. For some reason, the technical committee medical devices is developing that standard. There are, of course, also experts involved from the PPE side. And the standard will be called respiratory infection prevention devices for self and third-party protection. And then that standard, the aim is to have it harmonized under both the medical device legislation and the PPE legislation. So that's going to be a huge challenge with the HAS consultants and the Commission. But again, we're not at that stage yet, but that's one that's in development, and others combination can follow. So to finish, and I hope I'm more or less in time, because I know that's sometimes a problem with me. But in conclusion, I think, and I would insist the importance of the input from all stakeholders. It was already mentioned, all stakeholders, you have to find consensus. You have to avoid that one group or one even company or user is pushing his ideas into the standards. So the involvement of all stakeholders, different types, is really crucial, also in PPE and in any standard. And again, and it's been mentioned also a little bit and also in questions, the market, what happens in the market, that influences the standardization work. COVID is one example, but indeed developments, innovations, they also have an influence on and they have to have an influence on standardization, because standardization has to reflect the state of the art, whatever that means. But that means there has to be an evolution, and you have to get that out of what's happening in real life. Again, and especially when we're talking in the healthcare related sectors, PPE product legislation is not the only thing we have to look at, even if we're focusing on that as in terms of harmonization, but we have to take into account other legislations, other product legislation, but also other legislation, like there's lots coming on sustainability, on digitization. We have to take that into account as well. REACH, of course, always around the corner. Those things we need to take into account as well in standardization. And with that, I thank you for your attention. And if there are any questions, please. Where's this?
J'appuie, non?
We prepared, yeah, maybe you can learn. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. I indeed prepared a few slides. I already forgot. Sorry, I should have launched one maybe more in the beginning. Will they be on the screen? Yeah.
Yes, I will. So these are you've all got the directions on your agendas as well. If you go to slido.com and put in that code, you'll be able to very easily punch it up.
So the first question, maybe not really mentioned in the presentation, although yeah, one of the stakeholder groups is of course researchers. And that's also a group that we don't often see in standardization. So the question is it necessary for more researchers to get involved in standardization? And then, yeah, agree, slightly agree, do not know, slightly disagree or disagree, if you want to look at that. Okay, I guess that gives a fairly clear direction. Indeed, agree. I see nobody disagreeing, so that's already, sorry, a good step.
Also, people to get on Slido, I think then we'll get an idea. What we want to do is we want to keep these results and probably write them up and think about them afterwards. So if you are all able to get on and answer, that would be good. But it's not the end of the world if you can't attack.
Okay, and maybe, yeah, see if we can launch the second one as well. Oh, it's still changing, so wait a little bit more. Maybe you can already raise your question. Okay. In the meantime, I can think about the answer then while people are still answering.
Good for you. Yes. What did you do for PPE, CBRN PPE? I mean, you know, chemical ones. Because the classification, there is classification in 3 parts. 3 parts is okay, but types 1, 2, 6, it does not fit with new material. And we have problem because when we have a call, you know, people take this classification as, you know, what is standardization, what is up to date, and it's not the case. For example, for air permeable suits, you know, the classification does not permit to buy air permeable suits. And if we ask civilian people, civilian professionals to wear air impermeable suits, we will have problems. You know this. Yeah. Okay? And we have also problems with hoods. Okay? We have nothing to rely on to prove to our, you know, people, institutions, that would be the best way to protect people.
I don't know the standards in detail. As I mentioned, there's 200. I don't know all of them. It's not my job to do that. But it's one of those examples where indeed there is a huge need to have also users in the standardization, because that's what you express. Not so sure that there's somebody telling the same thing in the standardization group. So that's one thing. Second, there's always also the issue, you need to make sure you provide enough protection, but then on the other side, you're only protected if you wear the PPE. And if indeed they're not permeable and so on, so people are not comfortable, they will not wear them and thus not protected. So sometimes, as strange it might look, sometimes it's better to decrease the protection a little bit and increase the comfort a lot so that people actually wear the product and wear it correctly.
And in this case, we do not decrease the properties of the PPE, in fact.
I'm sure there are solutions, indeed.
I was a coordinator of a project called If React, okay? And we have a proof of concept of everything, okay? Why are we not invited in this program, you know? Why, you know, you do not rely on this report? 3 years of work, a lot of laboratories to test everything. You know, sometimes it makes me crazy.
Yeah.
Maybe a short response?
Me too, and I think it's a chicken egg. It's one of those chicken egg situations. You say, why are the projects not invited? There is an open invitation. Why are the projects not taking the step to go to national and send standards bodies? And I think there is indeed a problem of this link, and even in institutes where there is part is a notified body, they know exactly and they're involved in standardization, but another part of the institute is research, and these guys live somewhere on another planet sometimes, because even internally they have no idea what and that needs to be. And I guess in new projects from the Commission they push more and more into standardization, but then one of my criticisms to that is, if you have a research project, you know your result at the end of the project, and then the money is out. But that's the moment that you can start contributing in standardization. So there needs to be a solution for that as well. It's not in the beginning of your project that you can contribute to standards.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I think we can keep the slide running on the background. We go to the next question. Yep. I also got some, this one for you. There you go.
Thank you.
Forgotten you.
Thank you.
Then sorry to rush the questions, but otherwise we run out of time.
If there are more, I'm here.
Yes. So feel free to chat with Henk in the break. Our next presenter will join us remotely. That is Marco Pisani. Marco, I hope that you are on your way to our screen at least. And Marco works for INRIM, the Italian National Meteorological Institute. And Marco, in his regular work, mostly focused on aerospace. But he's also been at the forefront of setting up certification labs in Italy for PPE. So as you know, Italy was one of the first countries massively hit by COVID-19. At that time, Italy did not have any certification labs themselves for PPE, and Marco helped setting this up. So I think this is a very interesting presentation as well. Marco was planning on coming here face-to-face, but luckily for him, his son graduated today. So congratulations, Marco. You must be very proud.
Thank you.
And I hope that we can see you now.
Thank you.
And I will, of course,
good morning, everybody. I would like to see my slides.
Right. Okay, Marco, we can see you. Let me check if we can hear you as well.
You can see me, but I cannot see my slides. Okay, thank you. So I can see now. So in these minutes, I will tell you my experience as a scientist about the certification of facial masks As a researcher of a metrology institute, just referring to the previous talk, we are strongly involved in certification. So we know very well which is standardization mean, how much important it is. In this talk, probably I will give some impression about some drawbacks of certification or standardization in some critical situation. That is one of the critical situation I am speaking about. So next slide. In the very beginning of the next, please. If I don't see, okay. At the very beginning of the pandemic period, so the beginning of 2020, we didn't know how to afford this disease, but we know several things that are the thing where to start from. The first one is that this is a respiratory disease. That means that it's transmitted by breathing. The second one, next, is the fact that, next please, is the fact that there is, yes, previous. Unfortunately, I don't have the control of the slides. Okay, is the fact that there is a law that comes from epidemiology that says that the probability of getting the infection is proportional to the amount of virus. So this brings us to logical consequences. Next, the first one obviously is that the best thing is to stay away from the virus source. That is trivial. And the next one, please, is that in order to reduce the risk, if you cannot stay away, you have to filter somehow the air you are breathing. And this is something that even ancient doctors know somehow. But the born of the modern face mask is due to this guy who invented this face mask to protect against respiratory diseases. It was made of cotton wool. And the first widespread use of the face mask was exactly 100 years ago against the infamous so-called Spanish flu. Next. So, next, okay. So, from a scientist's point of view, our question was at the very beginning, what do we have to filter out? So we know that the sick person generates some aerosol, that is this cloud of droplets, which have a given size distribution in probability versus dimension class. These particles are carried around by air movements, and this is governed by the laws of fluid dynamics. And each droplet is carrying an amount of virus that is known, because the first thing that medicians do when they encounter a new disease, they measure the quantity of viruses that is contained in the saliva and so on. So we have all the data about what we want to filter out. Next. Now we want to build the filter. So what is a filter? The basic filter is a sieve, so it's a panel with holes, and it simply blocks objects that are larger than the holes. But the modern filter, next, is like the one you see in the picture, is made of fibers, combined a mix of large and thin fiber. This is, for example, fiberglass filter used in clean rooms, and it is governed by different mechanisms. Next. Okay. Yes. So I will not explain the mechanism, but the more thin are the particles, the more difficult it is to block them. The last mechanism for very thin particle is electrostatic force, next, that is known to be capable of capturing dust and tiny things. So these are the mechanisms, and the technology is already on the market. So next, the ideal phase filter must have two properties. One, obviously, is to block a certain percentage of particles, or let pass a certain percentage of particles. For example, starting to go into detail, for the FFP2 regulation, it is allowed a maximum of 6% of particle passing through the mask. This is the penetration limit. But the other parameter next is breathing resistance. So you put a filter on your face, but you have to breathe. So you want to be comfortable, and you not want to suffocate. So the point is that there must be a small difference in pressure, that is that delta P you see in the formula, which must stay under a given limit. For the FFP2 is of the order of 1,000 over an atmosphere. It's very small, but you can perceive it. So the number that counts are K, which is the property of the filter. Phi is the flux, so how much air are you breathing, and A is the area of the filter. Next, so that is the first example of misleading information we had in that terrible period, where in prime time on TV, for example, we were taught how to build our own mask with baking paper. You know that baking paper is waterproof, so it's airtight, and simply you cannot breathe through baking paper. So this is prime time in Italian TV. Next. Okay, so in professional filters, in order to reduce the delta pressure, you have to increase the area. And this is made by folding a lot of time the filter, that can be paper filter, like in this example of the next one. Next, in professional masks for workers. But next, we want to build something which is very small, very cheap. That means that the area is very small, and we cannot work enlarging the area, but we have to work next on changing the property of the filter. That is made by producing some magic material that can filter very well the particles and let you breathe very well. Next, this material is the melt-blown. Probably you heard about it. Is nothing terribly complex. I would say simple, because it's simply some plastic fibers that are melted and blown by a jet of hot air, so that next you can generate this like cotton wool material, mix of fibers, large and very thin fiber, that are able to filter very well particles. Next, the melt-blown is easy to manufacture, and eventually is electrically charged. There is a video, but doesn't matter. We can go to the next one. And is made of plastic, of a very common plastic. Is the most common plastic we all have in our kitchen since the 60s. And next, it was invented by an Italian chemist who won the Nobel Prize for that invention. So we have the material, we have the plastic, we have the technology to build a filter, and we know what to filter. Then next, we have to know how to characterize. Can we characterize a filter? We have to check for the penetration or the efficiency, which is the complement. So we simply need to have an aerosol generator and an aerosol detector. Next, so we will deal, and this comes from the standard we have to respect. We will deal with aerosol of sodium chloride, which is kitchen salt, and an aerosol of paraffin oil. The sodium chloride is generated by spraying salt water, then the water vaporized, So you have this cloud of tiny particle of salt crystal with their own size distribution. Next, this is the same aerosol that you breathe when you are close to the seaside. About the paraffin oil, this is again sprayed, and this pretty much the same smoke you generate with electronic cigarette. Next, and next. So now we have the aerosol generator, and we must detect somehow. As for the sodium chloride, we can exploit a phenomenon that everyone makes pasta knows, that in a gas flame, the bluish flame, when you put some salt, the sodium that is in the salt is excited and emits yellow light. So if you simply measure the amount of yellow light, yellow photons exiting from the flame, you measure the amount of sodium, and so the salt aerosol, which is contained in the air. So this is a very simple and efficient way to measure aerosol of sodium chloride. Next. When we deal with paraffin, we exploit another physical phenomenon, which is the light scattering. That is the one we always see when we see a laser beam in the air. If we see the laser beam, it means that the air is not clean, because otherwise we don't see the light. We see the light because the light is the air is full of some scattering point, which is dust, which is moisture, and the more intense is the beam you see, the scattered light, the more means there is high the content of aerosol in the air. So this is the second technique we use. So next, at this point, from a scientist's point of view, we have all what we need, because we have from the epidemiologists, we have the information about what we need to filter in order to reduce the risk. We know how to produce a filter, which is not difficult at all. And also we know how easily build some facility to test the filter. So in principle, we were ready just at the beginning of the outbreak, in the first months of 2020, to assess if a product, if a mask, if a filter was good or not good to protect yourself. This is what we wanted to do. We want to do because we know what the risk was. So, in fact, that is not the same approach next. That is from a lawmaker point of view. The lawmaker, the ruler, must put in the rules that people must respect, and he has to examine what already exists, which kind of masks already exist on the market, how are they regulated, which are the bodies that regulate these things. So the approach is completely different, and the result is, in fact, next, that the European accreditation published a document in March 2020 which recommended the use of medical face masks, which are the surgical masks, the one Hank told before, and or the respiratory protective device, which are the famous FFP1, 2, or 3, regulated by the EN 149. So this is what we have to do to protect ourselves. Okay, next. So let's go a bit into detail. So what are these standards? I will not speak about medical face masks, because they are not indeed the best way to protect ourselves, but the next is the regulation about the FFP, that is the EN standard 149 and related standards. Many pages of many deep details. Next, of quite complex norm. But I just want to give you like an outlook on what happens in the rest of the world. We have other regulation, which are the eldest one is the one from US, that is from the 80s, and this is the so-called N95. In the column, you see all the tests. I will not explain the tests. And the Chinese regulation, which is the KN95, is pretty much the same of the N95, so the same of the American. So more than half of the world respect this regulation. Europe has a different norm, which is almost the same, but except for the fact that is requested a test, an additive test, which is paraffin oil. Now I want to just to open a bracket. These masks were not designed for protecting against the virus. This was designed to protect worker working in building sites, in workshop, from concrete powders, from vapor oil. So this is why this norm that is very stringent is made in this way. Next. Indeed, many people, even our government at the end, used KN95 masks. Next. So, if we want to respect the 149 standard, we see that this is, I don't want to criticize it, I just want to describe which is the state of the art. It's very complex and it requires a lot of tests, many detailed tests, like conditioning, penetration test with sodium chloride, penetration test with paraffin, leakage test on the face, that is very important, breathing resistance, concentration of CO2, and resistance to flame. This is useless from my point of view, wearability test, and so on. Next. And all these tests are, okay, very complex, we will see a bit later, but the result of the to be obliged to test, to apply this test on this mask is that there are very few accreditation bodies able to make this test. Next, if you see, there are only 11 laboratories able to test for the EN 149 in all Europe, and no one in Italy. This is the reason why we were desperate and wanted to build something in a very short time. Next. Okay, so just to have a clue of what is this norm, it describes in a very thin detail all what you have to build. And next, and sometimes also it is not written well and it's not consistent with itself. So this is a level of complication, additive level of complexity. And it goes into details that sometimes also look not so useful, like, for example, the next, which is the exact height of the hopper, which is used for physical exercises. Next. So, as a result, I am speaking only from the Italian point of view because I know exactly what happened in Italy in that period. We had the recommendation to wear this kind of masks, but we had tons of masks arriving from China, but we did not have the possibility of certificate them in a proper way or in a short time because the certification is so complex. So the result was, at least in Italy, I don't know in the rest of Europe, that the government next made emergency law, which is that we were allowed to wear community masks. Community masks, if I would translate from Italian this text means absolutely nothing, because it says that you can put anything on your face and it is okay. We, as scientists, obviously measured this any kind of tissue, and no one is properly filtering. So it's like putting next and next is putting on your face nothing against the virus. I'm sure that this also caused a lot of sick people and death. So next one. Also, we had a very bad example from our government, people who should give an example and put these things on their face. And next, even worse, we had misleading advertising, because we had advertising saying, okay, buy these masks that will protect you forever, and you can wash it and you will not die. But all these kind of commercial masks were not respecting the standards, and they were dangerous. In fact, all these people get sick at the end. Next. So, communities masks, from my point of view, is like painting on your shirt a safety belt. Next. So, as we decide to start at the very beginning of the outbreak, in building instrument to measure the efficiency of the filters, and they worked quite well. So next, we were able to assess if some tissue was okay or not okay. But obviously, that is obvious, we were not recognized as a certification body. So our information that were very precious were not used. They were used only by a friend of us that were told by us what to use and not to use, but it was like nothing. So next, we decide if we wanted to contribute in an effective way against the pandemic, we had to respect the AN 149, otherwise our work was useless. So we decided to build a consortium with the INRIM, University of Turin, and a private company which made almost all the work, in order to implement a laboratory in Italy able to make all the tests respecting the norm. Next. And we started working on this, and we realized any page, any row of the norm exactly as it was written. Next. Starting from the nebulizer, from the flux control of the gases, the flame test, the test cabin to check for the leakage. And next, we build the conditioning machine to condition the masks before the test with humid air, the machine that allows to measure the content of CO2 in the mask. Next. And flux control of all the gases entering in the machine, pumps, valves, and so on. Next, the nephelometer needed to measure the scattering. It was almost an industrial production. We invented the device and built them. And also we modified an old flame spectrometer to make the salt test. Next. Finally, okay, the burner to make the flammability test of the mask. For example, the flame must be exactly 40 millimeter, and that is. The temperature must be 83 degrees, and that is. Next, we built the test chamber where all the masks eventually are placed, sealed, and tested after the conditioning. And next, the software which is able to manage next all the thing. Finally, next, even the hopper, which was exactly 1.5 meter tall. So I have arrived to the conclusion of my talk. Next. As a result, we have realized the first Italian laboratory able to test the FFP according to 149 regulation, and it was recognized as an external laboratory of a certification body in July 2020. So eventually we could make official measurement. This official measurement were used to make a real check of what was imported, for example, from China, which till that moment were just was only controlled by looking at the documents. So the documents accompanying that lot of 10 millions of masks said these masks are okay. So if they are okay, we can put on the market. That's exactly what happened before. Later, they come to our laboratory, they test and discharged fake masks that were a lot. Our work helped to sequester about 1 billion of masks arrived in Italian. I like to think that this also allowed to save some lives. Furthermore, this work allowed also Italian producers to build their mass and check for their production, and also to fabricate meltblown. Next one is the last one. Next. This is the first product we have seen that is really fake. The mid one was tested, is official, but it was tested on a controversial laboratory in Turkey, and the last one was certified by our laboratory. Next, last. Okay, so with this, I only want to recommend you, in case, I hope never more, you have to wear a mask, please shape the nose wire, because otherwise all the work we have done is not useful. So with this, I thank you for your attention, and I have finished. Thank you. You have to...
Marco, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
I think that we have time for 1 or 2 short questions. I heard yesterday at the project internal meeting some question about instant certification of PPE. So maybe we can ask that question now, because I think that you're the right person to ask this question too. Garrick, yes. We have a box. Katrien, if you could be so kind. And,
yes, of course.
Then I will throw it to you. Oh, yeah. There we go.
I cannot see you.
Garrick, you have to come here, then I can see you as well. Okay. Here's the camera.
Thank you.
No, good morning, and thanks for a very interesting presentation. I'm talking as a person who knows nothing about it, but who obviously heard a lot. So my question is, you presented filtering, which is like a mechanical filtering of the particles. But there were quite a few masks what we will even asked to evaluate and so on, which claim what in addition to filtering, they can do neutralization. And that's the people say the copper mask. If you put the copper on a mask, it's not only filters, but it also kills the germs, and you can use it longer. What do you think about this? And also, is there standards for such a masks?
I am not expert of standards, but how was well explained by the speaker before me, everything is related to the medical part that is killing germs is another word, because it is the medical standardization. So this is just to tell you that it cannot exist today a norm. I'm sure that does not exist, because the only norm that is made specifically for aerosol is that one. Is not made for germs, is not made for this outbreak. So your suggestion is an idea I've heard many clever and even crazy ideas in that period. Also active masks like that, even electrically active masks. Who knows? They can work or not. But if you don't have a standard that regulate that, you cannot sell. Simply, you cannot sell. So I think that the lesson I have learned is that, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, because I know the advantage and disadvantage, in order to put something on the market or put in the hospitals, you need to respect the normative. If the normative does not exist, you cannot do it. You can do it at home, but not for the people. That is what it was terrible. From my point of view, if I want to criticize a bit the word of the creators of this kind of standard, I would say that the fact that create a standard takes so long period when you are dealing with an emergency situation like this, where every day is important. You should be able to build a normative which can be effective for all Europe in 1 month, not in 3 years, because it's too late. And okay, I have not answered your question, I know.
Marco, thank you very much. I think that we need to go into the break here in the room, get yourself a cup of coffee. Marco, I also have some waffles for you. I know I can't give them to you personally, but I will be in Turin in September, so I'll bring one with me for you. So thank you very much.
Thank you to you. See you. Bye.
Then for the people in the room, I think that we need a break. We need some coffee. We need some caffeine to energize ourselves. I would say a break until 12:10. To get a cup of coffee, to get the energy back into the room. So if everybody gets back to your seat, then I will introduce our new speaker. That is Isabelle Meslier-Renaud. Isabelle is a senior policy officer, and I'll also go to her speaker profile. A senior policy officer involved in European and nationally funded research projects for 15 years, and she's formerly been the standardization point of contact for the European Commission of the Directorate General Home. So that's a very relevant experience that she has there. And Isabelle is currently in charge of the law enforcement network and core groups management in the Europol Innovation Lab. And she will tell us something about what she's doing there. So Isabelle, if I can hand over to you. Thank you very much. I will take this one with me.
Good morning, everybody. Firstly, I want to thank either No Fear Consortium and NEN for their invitation, their welcome, and the yesterday evening social event that was very nice and friendly. I recently joined the Europol Innovation Lab, and I'm going to present you how we are working on to promote innovative tools, solutions, and for sure, and that's the point, share the best practices. So, I'm waiting for the next slide, please.
Sorry, you have to do it yourself.
Okay, sorry.
Maybe
sorry.
I should have explained
that's
that.
The point.
There we go.
Sorry. So, the law enforcement innovation principles are there. We all know that we all know examples of technological advancement that have been developed throughout decades of work and research, represent some of the innovations that change really the paradigm and are about to revolutionize the way in which law enforcement operates, but could be for the same for first practitioners and so on. The Innovation Lab is not there to invent new tools or new ways of working, but within the Europol clearing board, I will speak on it later, we are building an environment to connect to other innovators. Could be EU agencies, could be EU institutions, and for sure member states. and even associated members like Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, I forget one, Liechtenstein, sorry. And of course, where law enforcement agents can share and experiment best practices, and that's the point also. We believe that innovation in data science and artificial intelligence will enable law enforcement practitioners to work and more efficiently and to stay at the forefront of combating transnational crime. Sorry, I will speak about artificial intelligence projects we are working on later. Law enforcement innovation is not just the latest gadget. It's about finding new ways to do things better. Innovations can take the form of new concepts, new methods, or new tools. But innovation tends to work best when all these forms come together to enable police and law enforcement agencies to have greater insight and impact than ever before. The innovations that are shaping the future of law enforcement begin with emerging technologies. And we are working on emerging technologies that support new concept of operations, enabling the intervention and relationships that keep society safe. Sorry for my accent. So, Europol was mandated as the Justice and Home Affairs ministers from all the EU member states at the end of 2019 to create an innovation lab to support the law enforcement community in fostering innovation and enabling them to make the most of new technologies and innovative solutions. The lab aims to monitor of new technologies development and identify, promote and develop concrete solutions supporting the EU member states' operational work while we are gathering the needs. This will help investigators, analysts to make the most of the opportunities offered by the new technology to avoid, for sure, duplication of work. That's also one of our purposes, create synergies and pool resources together. That's our ecosystem. We can split in three parts. In the middle, it's the Europol Innovation Lab, which is split in three teams. The law enforcement network management, the foresight team, and the project team. So the Innovation Lab is a gravitational point for the police related to innovation. And we want all the projects to plug in, while the project like ILEAD, ILEANETS, or NLETS, that are law enforcement networks of practitioners, have a limited lifetime. And we want to guarantee uptake of their results and continue the life of their outcomes through the Innovation Lab sharing tools. We have also the foresight team, which is working on, for example, deepfakes detection, on metaverse, on quantum encryption, and so on. I will speak more accurately on project teams, which because before the new mandate of Europol, we were able to submit to Horizon 2020 project as a partner. Now it's not possible anymore, so we are following a number of European funded projects. On the right, you'll see the EU Innovation Hub. I will speak more precisely later. It's a strategic level of discussion between the member states, the EU agencies, could be Frontex, could be EULISA, could be Eurojust, and so on, and the member state for sure. The networks of innovators is included in that point, and make the synergies to avoid duplication. We are also working on mapping to be sure that some member states or some EU institutions are not working on the same project separately. We make synergy to have a very common work on some common issues and cross-cutting issues. I will come further on it. So that's as a summary, we try to make the most of the opportunities offered by new technology to help the law enforcement to be able to face the new criminality, because organized crime are very able to catch the new technology to go throughout the different regulation, if I can say. We try to provide to law enforcement agency some set of service. I will speak about them after, to help them for the daily duty, even in more prototype model, if I can say, beta model. So, regarding the project team, we are also now currently involved in several projects. The 4 main projects are GRACE, which is a platform for automated process of referrals. It's for child abuse topics. HIDA, because I think there is, I don't see the E, sorry, is a project on artificial intelligence and advanced big data analytics for law enforcement agency. We have also Infinity, which is an analytic platform for intelligence extraction, and GRACE, I spoke on it. We have also other projects that I mentioned, it's perhaps not readable for you, sorry. Overlock, which is AISF project to share information about encrypted phones. We have also ProfID, it's forensic profiling of fraudulent documents. We are Europol Innovation Lab and is working on a core group. I will speak about the core group after. And one of our most projects on which the 3 teams are working on is the accountability principle for AI. This is a very important project. You can find the interim report on the Europol website. The starting point was 2 Horizon 2020 projects, Tensor and AIDA. The main purpose was to create a robust set of agreed and validated accountability principles that integrate practitioners' citizens' position on AI. The fact is to have acceptability, transparency, and a poll has been done, and we have seen that many people were conscious of the great potential of AI to help internal security to reach the objectives, even if some concern still exists about the use done by the police regarding some non-democratic issues that we can meet in the future, for example. The toolkit will be available to ensure the deployment of AI tools for internal security in an accountable and transparent manner in line with EU values and fundamental rights. Because the EU agency, Fundamental Rights Agency, which is in Vienna, is totally part of this project. So, sorry, I'm a bit talkative. So, one main point of the Innovation Lab is a European Clearing Board. This is the way to manage different core groups on different topics, and it's a forum for law enforcement experts to exchange experience, best practices, and co-create technical solutions and methods. And we have working groups on different topics. For example, we are working on secure communication channels, could be for cross-border criminal pursuit for drugs, for example, or for smuggling, but also for disaster resilience. It has been used during the big fires we had to face this summer. We are working on facial recognition, on satellite imagery analysis for law enforcement purposes, for smuggling and traffic, and we are also working, as I said, on forensic profiling on fraudulent documents. It's an app which should be used by all the borders police to check the documents in the airports, in the railway station, and so on. We are working on darknet monitoring, on speech and text analysis, on virtual reality and policy. It has just begun 2 weeks ago, so it's very young one, and online policing, the way for the police to be present in the different social media, in games, forum eventually, and it's to prepare the presence of police in the metaverse, if it will exist one day, because it's difficult at the moment. We have also strategic groups that are less operational on artificial intelligence, of technologies and ethics and foresight, and it's mostly working on the new technology like within the metaverse, quantum encryption, and so on. We have also different tools to help in daily life the law enforcement agents that can connect. The purpose is to provide technologies, tools to our colleagues, and to stay abreast of the latest news of new technology. Also to share expert knowledge and assessment on existing tools. We have the wiki, where experts and law enforcement agents can go share and have insight and information on special technology. The Europol code repository, it's to have collaborative environment to facilitate the co-creation and sharing between the different law enforcement agencies. I mean, at national level. We have also the Europol tool repository, which is on the left. We have its open tools that have been developed within police departments that are shared. For example, we have translation tools, speech to text. We have geolocalization of pictures to be able to say if the pictures has been taken in the place it was installed, or at the good moment. We have this tool has been, for example, used to say it's a good place, but it's not the good moment. So the picture is a false proof, for example. So the last and main department of the Europol Innovation Lab is the European Innovation Hub that involves all the European agencies, meaning the Commission, the Council, and all the agencies that could be involved in the internal security domain, Eurojust, Fundamental Rights Agency, EULISA, which is the EU agency on IT system, Frontex on borders, Europol for sure, CEPOL, which is a training agency, and all the member states that want to be involved. The Innovation Lab is a collaborative network. It's working on cross-cutting common issues that concern all areas of internal security. The hub is hosted at Europol Innovation Lab. We are the secretariat of this hub, and we support the cooperation between the different, the various EU innovation labs that exist within the different EU agency, member states, and so on, always to avoid duplication and to promote synergies. And we want to deliver common innovative technology solutions and have a look on the strategy. And for example, we have drafted still the beginning of the year, a mapping of innovative actors, innovative projects. And we want also to identify research and innovation initiatives and needs for everybody. I think I've finished, so I'm waiting for your questions. Sorry for being talkative. I shortened my presentation during the morning. I hope it's been understandable for. Thank you.
Thank you for the very good presentation, what Europol and the EU agencies are doing. So I think it's a crucial body, so very good to hear more about that. I also, before I forget it, you were away too quickly, I have also the waffles for you, of course. I will. We don't want you to forget this. Thank you. Then I will introduce the next speakers. We have two speakers now, that is Lukáš Moravec and Patricia Compar. I will start with Lukáš, he's on top. Lukáš is the convener. The convener, that is standardization language for leader, so working group leader of the Standardisation 391 Working Group 1 on standardization in security standards for healthcare facilities. And then we have Patricia Compar, and Patricia Compar, she is the chair of Standardisation 391, Citizen and Societal Security. And this is a very important technical committee for our committee. We also have a very, let's say, tight connection with the technical committee. So I'm very happy that you were talking something about the work that you're doing and also how we can interact with the project in the field of standardization. So thank you very much, and feel free to take the stage.
Thank you. So where is it?
Arrows up here.
Is this one?
Yeah.
There? Okay, so thank you for inviting me. I must say I'm very happy to be here. First thing I want to say is that from a standardization perspective, this project, No Fear, is incredibly successful from my point of view. I've been working with all practitioners network that should get involved in my TC, and this one has the best achievements. And I will explain you why, and I will explain you how you can get more involved. So, first, what are standards? Quick, it's complementary to what was said this morning earlier. That's the ISO definition, but it's a very good one. There are documents providing specifications, guidelines or characteristics that can be used consistently to ensure that materials, products, processes and services are fit for their purpose. So when we say this, what does this mean? What can this bring to you? Of course, you can understand materials, products, processes, and services. Yes, if you have some framework, some things aligned, it is very useful and it can really ease your everyday business. So the standards, there are not just a piece of paper. When you achieve a standard, you have achieved a process that ends up with something that's solid, that is a concrete and shared outcome, workable for all stakeholders, developed by consensus of experts. That means people know what they're doing and why they're doing it, as well as investments. It takes time to do a standard. Oh, it's too long, too complicated. I don't know how this works. Let's do something else, Well, if you think you need a standard and you don't have it, it means you're already 3 years late. You should have done this 3 years ago. That's what it means. And you're getting late on the one you're going to need in 3 years. So you'd better, get on board and do it. So there are investments and powerful lever to strengthen your activities and to develop markets. It means that you build something that is going to secure what you do, that is going to ease what you do, that is going to secure your investments, that is going to make you more efficient, that is going to make your results more reliable. So that has value. It takes time, but it has a very, very strong value, especially speaking for your network, because you're dealing with people's life. By the way, if you can achieve more harmonization, coordination, common tools, you can achieve even more results in your research, in your everyday business, and you can also achieve economies of scale, which means that we develop a European market and the prices go down for what you buy. So that's very important to figure out. What could be the benefits of standardization in my field, which is social and citizen security? It's about the processes, it's about the use of technology, it's complementary to the one that Hank presented you. Of course, we don't deal with technical specifications, but all the rest, the wrapping up, the how do you say, operative system, we deal with that. And this is your everyday business. So standards, they force you to ask yourselves the right questions at the right time, with the right people, in order to invest and to respond as appropriately as possible. You see, think of COVID, or just think of any situation, when you have the best preparedness and the best tools possible, you're better off than when you have to improvise. To develop conditions for implementing innovation and developing interoperability where appropriate. Well, sometimes you say, I wish I would have this and this. Okay, well, yes, but this needs to have some things prepared and some processes aligned, some specifications aligned, and so on. So, well, do it. To guarantee your secured and effective processes, you don't want anyone to interfere in your processes. You were speaking of providers trying to push something that you don't want. Well, you are the boss. You know what you're doing. So you secure your processes. You can even secure processes from any kind of intervention, including the one from government. Sometimes, they want to, take money somewhere, and well, if the process is not secured, well, you may secure it with a standard. So you can guarantee secure and effective processes. Also, as well, for equipment, you can have standards on systems, technical systems, or processes, or mixed technical and processes. You have protocols, in your work. So I guess you understand what I mean. But also, what's also very important, data, training. It's very important. with standards, you can make the most of your budget. Budget are not very strong, and the population is aging, so we're in trouble, you know. So you have to spend more and more. So make the best of your budget with investment, training, and everything. You can use standards to do that. And what's also important is when you invest in standardization and you say, well, this is how it works, this is what I want, this is how it should be, you take the control. You don't let anyone else tell you what you should be doing. Isn't that important? Sometimes people say, I don't like standards. Standards doesn't fit what I do. Okay, that's possible. But just join and do the standard you need. So, a few examples of standards, some of them from ITC. Well, the ISO EN 22361 is just being published. It's the first time we have a crisis standard, European standard becoming an ISO standard. And it's from ITC. It was published in 2018, and the international version in 22. Building a strategic capability. This is suitable for anyone, for a hospital, for a local shop, for a university, for anybody. And it's very easy to read it, to understand. You don't have to be an expert. Emergency management, this is also a very important one. We make a difference between crisis and emergency, as you know, and disaster and incident. The ISO 22300, which is the Bible. Vocabulary, as you know, we have, of course, the same vocabulary at the international and European level, but within ITC we also develop a vocabulary specific to Europe, which is complementary. We have a CBRNE terminology, but we could also have terminology for medical emergency services or different frameworks if you need them, because when we're in Europe, we work closely. We can go much more in details in order to get a better coordination. We also have two other standards here to mention that are from Working Group 1 that is convened by Lucas, which is the guidance for managing security in healthcare facilities and the guidance for the security of hazardous material, CBRNE, in healthcare facilities. So, what is very successful with this, your project, No Fear, is that you have invented something that is much more than a proof of concept in terms of pre-standardization, which is the better practice guide. My God, this is fantastic, because it is not just there, it's working. It's working for you, it's working for other projects who've used it. You will have a presentation on the better practice guide this afternoon from Tom Flynn. But you see, I didn't support you with that. I just looked at what you were doing. You just thought what would be clever to do, and you found out a process that is using exactly the same principles than the ones that we're using in standardization. So it makes sense. It's common sense. I won't read this because it's not necessary, but you see this is pretty much aligned. So what you do here, yes, it makes sense. So congratulations for this best practice guide, because before you decide, okay, we're going to move on and develop this project, we send a new work item proposal, and you have to figure out your way, and this is pre-standardization. It can be quick, it can be slow, but when it's about coordinating processes for 15, 20 countries, it takes time. And when it's mature enough, you move to standardization, and this is pre-standardization. This better practice guide allows you to do it, and to do it very efficiently. So thank you very much for this contribution. So now I will give the floor to my colleague Lucas, who is in charge of Working Group 1 Healthcare Facilities, that deals with the topics that you deal with in the No Fear project.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your invitation here. It's great that We have now moving forward with some results identified by the No Fear project, and let me dive into more specific topic in standardization, which is about the security. Based on the No Fear project, we identify that there are some important issues which should be solved by the standardization, or are the topics for the standardization. This is the security perspective, safety perspective, and here I'd like to emphasize that the security and safety are in most countries and in most languages the same word, and it is important to look at these two topics that they are mixing and they are impacting each other. And I'm very happy that we had a presentation from European Safety Federation, and I think it will be important to come into discussion between the professionals for the safety, which is more about the occupational health and safety for example, in Czech language, and also with the security perspective and security professionals. Well, in No Fear project was identified that the PPEs get very huge impact on the security and on the protocol, and the use of the PPEs is important from a security and safety perspective. Also, there is a need for some evaluation methods for the PPEs, and also from the security perspective. This is not only about how the PPEs are manufactured. This is not about the material standards, but maybe how they are used and how they are evaluated from the security perspective, and also risk management related to PPEs. So now let me give you some insight into process. Actually, in TC 391, which is dealing with societal security, we issued a new work item proposal to the TC, and now we are waiting for ballots that the TC will agree to develop the standard which will deal with the security perspective of PPEs and their use within the healthcare facilities. We have 2 months or 1 month and a half. At the second half of January next year, we will have the result, and hopefully it will be positive, and we can get to another step and another stage where I think it will be one of the most important and also mentioned here part, the call for experts. It is, and I have to emphasize it again, it is very important to have the experts, not only from the hospitals, but also from the manufacturers, from labs, from innovation and research and development sector and organizations. So it is important as much as we can get from these experts, so the standard will meet several requirements of these stakeholders, because we can imagine that every standard will impact the manufacturers, every standard will impact the users, and we are not talking about the staff in hospitals, we are talking also about the visitors and also about the public. What will be the scope of the standard? As I've mentioned, there are several topics which should be addressed. If we are talking, for example, about the procurement and the supply chain, it's not about to say how to write a request for proposals, but it's important to say how to include the security perspective in the proposals, to set up requirements, because you have within the hospital security professionals, and you have to talk to them, what are their needs, what are their requirements from their perspective and from the perspective of their jobs, to protect the staff, visitors and patients and any other assets. Well, if we are talking about the supply chain, the best example is that within healthcare facilities there are other suppliers of other services, and you will probably request them to use the PPEs when they are going inside a facility or outside, and so on. Also, we can address the environmental aspects because we are talking about the PPs which are contaminated. You have some specific security protocols to deal with these types of equipment or used equipment and so on. The standard is intended to be applied to healthcare facilities in general, so it may include not only hospitals, but mental health clinics, polyclinics, or everywhere where the healthcare is provided. So there are also some important findings that, for example, from identification perspective, we can use personalized PPEs. Well, it's not about the Batman's logo on the textile face masks, but it's about the colored PPEs, which may very simply and quickly identify who is the staff, who is a visitor, and so on. And also, if we are talking about, for example, in EMS or within EMS with a complete suit, there could be a requirement to have a place to put a name or any other badge which will help to identify someone who is wearing PPEs. Also, we can talk about the transparent face masks or any other technical questions or security questions related to PPE's use. It's important to say that the role of leaders which are responsible for issuing the protocols or guidelines within the facility, and everybody remembers the COVID-19 pandemics and the security issues which took place in hospitals and huge facilities, and also in the public or public places. It is critical to have something what will help to these team leaders be more safe and to support their roles. Well, we have also faced, one of the findings is that the PPEs and their use was a big issue when we take a look on the national regulations and when we take a look on how the PPEs were used within the different countries, what were the requirements, where to wear it and how, and there were some specific security issues, and we can have examples in different perception of PPEs, different culture aspects, and also the fake news about the PPEs and so on. So these all topics or issues we would like to address, and specifically to help the people which are responsible for security to communicate between each other, between the facilities, between the countries which are members of the European Union and also the other countries. So, well, thank you very much, and if you will have any questions, so please ask. Thank you. Yes, my boss.
No, I'm not really your boss, we're colleagues. Thank you. This practitioners network, No Fear, is the only one that has a new work item proposal balloted. So that's also a standardization achievement. The work is on tracks. So thank you.
Maybe also a question from my side. If people want to participate in this work, can you say anything about that, how they have to do that?
Well, it was mentioned this morning by Nen. We work as a network in Europe. So there's an entry point, which is the national standardization body. So yours would be NEN, so either it's BSI, AFNOR, DIN, ASTRO, whatever, you have one. So you have to join there. And if you are a member of this, and well, it's also a good thing to participate in the national committee that is mirroring the international activities you want to participate in. You are allowed to join to any interesting work for your business and attend any meeting, be an expert in anything you want, propose standards, be a candidate to become a project leader, a convener, a chair. You have to join your national standardization body. And you see, either you attend, meetings, workshop, you work in projects, okay. But if you want to have a result, join standardization, because yes, you will spend time and effort working on something, but at the end you will achieve something that is working for everybody, and that you will keep updated, that you will kind of own, to support your business. You see, this is the right place to be in standardization. It's not just about writing the documents, it's about the thoughts. And okay, this is what we want to do. Let's write it down. Let's keep it alive and efficient and working for us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I just want to say one thing, that we will call for experts and we will try to communicate with every national standardization body to spread the word that the standard is developing. And I think Patricia said one important thing, that to participate is to work on the documents, to comment the documents. It is not necessary to travel to plenary meetings of TC 391, because this is mostly about the formal stuff. So I think it's about the communication online, and luckily we had a COVID, so now everybody is skilled in that, so well, we can work in this matter.
It is very rewarding. This is incredible what we create. When you're here with experts from all over Europe, working in your business, it's much more than what you hear in an event or whatever. You build something very strong because you benefit from the expertise of everybody and their business experience. So you end up with a result that is very, very strong and very relevant. And this is incredibly rewarding for you. So just this is a good reason to join standardization. You learn a lot.
Thank you. I've seen a few questions also in the back, so I'm not sure who was first. I have to keep the time in mind as well, because at 1 o'clock, as I explained in the beginning, we also expect some special visitor, but let us try.
Thank you. I'm Andres from the regional public health provider in Madrid. Well, I'm in another project, I procure security, and we are participating in TC 251, and it's very difficult to participate. I know it's not so easy, but my question is about, I attended 2 hours ago the series event in Brussels and on critical infrastructures, and they talked about CAA, and there was a bit of debate. What do you think of that?
I think we will address this issue this afternoon, CWA. Personally, I don't like it. Sorry, it's not a good way to do things. It's never worked, never. So, we're dealing with policies. Why should research projects tell us what to do if they're not joining the TC? It doesn't make sense. And by the way, TCWAs usually are not with the right people, asking the right questions, using the right framework, how can we take them, for me it doesn't work. But we'll talk about this later, no more.
I see one question in the back. Maybe you can give it to me and I will throw it, or I will bring it. I'll bring it. To avoid any unnecessary casualties here.
Just on the topic of being involved in standards committees, I wanted to make sure that everyone here is aware of an EU program if your standard is at all related to ICT or any kind of communication technology, that there's funding available to do this. So I understand that there are some academics in the room, and it requires time, it requires commitment, but the program is called STAND, STAND, ICT.EU. They're going to have 2 more open calls, and you have to relate whatever work you're doing to ICT standard development and a European perspective in the standardization committees. And it's important to know this because it can pay for your time. It can pay for your travel to be at the table, because that's what I'm hearing. We need experts at the table, academic experts, practice experts, and it's important to be involved in the conversation. So having the financial means to do that is available. And please feel free to contact me. I evaluate for that program in terms of who gets the funding, so I'd be happy to discuss more with you. And I heard you say that too. How come our EU projects aren't represented? Well, many of the applicants say, we've worked with this EU project and we want to bring our results to the table, and that's very favorably evaluated. Thanks.
Mark, I'm afraid that we have to close up now because I've been informed that we have a visit at the moment. I will give, of course, the waffles. This one is for you, Lucas. Thank you very much. And I have one for you as well, Patricia. Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's also the moment that we open up for lunch. So I think that I will drive in the lunch cart. And it's time for us to relax. I would say we have a lunch until 2 o'clock, and then we start up again. So we're 1 hour lunch. Okay, yeah, we're starting up again. If everybody could go back to their seat. Thank you. Okay. Everybody ready? I hope you all had some time to have a good break, to get some food, and also hope you enjoyed our special visit. I also hope that the people in the call had some time to grab something to eat and you're back full of energy. I will introduce the new speaker, the speaker that we had actually scheduled before the lunch, but she was very flexible and also agreed to have the presentation now. So it is Nicola Entwistle, if I pronounce the name correctly. And Nicola has worked for more than 4 years in the pre-hospital sector in the sales department, and she works for the company Safeguard Medical. And her responsibilities involve managing both the UK region as well as international customer service. Nicola, can I invite you to the stage? And I hope that your presentation is there as well. I'll just go through. And it's over to you.
Brilliant. So I will try and make this as painless as possible, considering everyone's just eaten. I might be a little bit tired. So I'm here to talk about the MDD moving to the MDR regulations. So a brief overview of what that means. She says, the MDD has been in effect with the EU since 1993. It's 27 years ago. The medical device landscape has changed drastically in that time and led to the need for a more comprehensive and technically aware set of regulations. Software-enabled devices, for example, were still a long way off when the MDD first came into law. No one could ever have conceived of a fitness tracking app, let alone a computerized surgical instrument. The MDR accounts for the full technological landscape, establishing guardrails for the regulation, manufacturing, and commercialization of cutting-edge medical devices. Furthermore, the demographics of the EU, and indeed the world as a whole, are trending older. Thanks to innovation in healthcare and other developments, people are living longer and relying on medicines and medical devices more and for longer periods of time than ever before. This shift has precipitated increased public interest in device safety and efficiency, particularly over the long term. While the MDD focused on getting a product to the market, MDR expands to consider the full product life. So it is to do with the development, the testing, the manufacturing, and the safety and long-term use. This is not to say that MDD ignored these. It just means that MDR takes a more interested look at the full life cycle of the product. Okay, so what are the key differences between MDD and MDR? Key difference 1, new safety requirements for medical devices. Safety evolutions have always been an integral part of medical device development. Testing and initial use. Fundamentally, the MDR expands on the MDD by increasing scrutiny on device safety throughout the product life cycle. Pre-market requirements. Medical device development companies hoping to bring their products to market in the EU will now be required to submit additional safety and performance data. This shift is clear in the number of pre-market safety requirements. While the MDD had 13 essential requirements, or ERSs, the MDR now has 23 general safety performance requirements. New requirements include so many, but are not limited to post-market surveillance, pre-market surveillance, and the full life cycle. We then move on to PMS, or post-market surveillance. The MDR holds device manufacturers responsible for all PMS activities. Under the new regulation, manufacturers must do the following: plan, establish, document, implement, maintain, and update a PMS system that is proportionate to a device's degree and appropriate for it to actively and systematically gather, record, and analyze data on the quality, performance, and safety of a device through its lifetime. Holistically, the purpose of this reporting is to demonstrate that a product's actual market use mirrors its intended use. Risk and risk management have not changed. Device benefits continue to outweigh risks and more. When changes, risks, complaints, or adverse events, manufacturers are responsible for making the appropriate changes. So when you move on to reporting requirements, vary drastically between devices, risk classes, and types. Class 1 devices require only a consistent PMS report, but devices in higher classes also require a periodic safety update report, or a PUSAR. A PUSAR should include the results and conclusions of PMS activities and analysis, findings from post-market clinical follow-up, and sales data. Manufacturers of Class 3 and implantable devices must also submit their PUSAR to the notified body on an annual basis. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the MDR requires that certain serious incidents must be reported within 15 days. Under the MDD, this was originally 30. Key difference number 2, the new concept of purpose of medical devices. The device is creating a lot of buzz, and rightfully so. It represents a significant change to the categorization of medical devices. Under MDR guidance, products that were never previously categorized as medical devices now fall under the umbrella and are subject to class and type appropriate MDR requirements. Key difference 3, medical device classifications. Many medical device companies have wondered if their product will be grandfathered into MDD requirements. The answer is clear. All medical devices that carry a CE mark will be required to meet the new EU MDR guidelines, and no devices will be grandfathered in. Given the logistics and financial hurdles that a lot of manufacturers will have to overcome in order to achieve compliance, devices that carry a valid MDD certificate will remain valid for 5 years from the date of that certificate's issue. However, there are some MDR requirements that all devices must have met by May 26, 2021. The MDR also reclassifies several devices into higher risk categories, meaning that devices may be subject to an increased level of scrutiny and both pre and post-market regulation. Under MDD, most medical software was classified as Class 1. Some may fall into higher classifications. Implantable devices that are Class 2B will be broken into well-established technology, or wet, and non-wet categories. So, the clinical aspect of it. In the emergency medicine world, users don't often cooperate with the follow-up and monitoring of devices. It's a known fact. Faulty devices are discarded and not remembered. They don't report faults, so the manufacturers don't have the opportunity to do post-market surveillance and analysis on the devices. It is difficult to get an ethical approval for clinical studies with novel emergency devices. We involve end users in usability tests to minimize this gap between them and the industry, and better understand how to avoid the valley of death of medical devices. And that is MDR in a nutshell.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope it's not a sign of what I'm going to talk about, but I see the room kind of downsizing pretty quickly after every presentation. So there mightn't be many of us left at the end of this slot. I hope not, though. Anyway, you're all very welcome, for those in person and for those online. I hope you can hear me clearly. So my name is William Hines. Most people call me Bill or Billy, so please feel free to do so. And I'm here to talk to you today about peers. It's a new EU project, an innovation and coordination action project within the European Commission that has only just started. It's like literally started this month. So we're very new to what we're bringing to you today. But it's all about building on this ecosystem of standards and standards practice. And I was actually thinking before I was going to deliver this presentation today, what standards are and what they mean to different people in practice. And I was actually thinking to myself, have I ever worked in standards? And to me, standards are very linked with rules and regulations, but both written and documented, as Patricia was saying earlier, also in practice and from experience. And I was actually thinking back to a project that I was indirectly involved in, and where real standards, practices and procedures came into play. And it was in the aviation industry. So I worked for the National Airport Authority in Ireland for 5 years. And at the very early start of that, an incident, a very sad incident, happened in Düsseldorf Airport. You may remember that. It was 1996, so what was that, 26 years ago, where a number of fatalities happened. I think there was 18 fatalities, 88 injuries. And how that event happened, if you recall, some of you are way too young to remember this, but how the event happened was subcontractors were on site, working on the landside terminal side of a building, so not airside but landside, where it's very open access. And these contractors were undertaking a welding operation under the undercarriage of the arrivals concourse road. And a spark flew off the welding equipment, hit an electrical cable, went straight across the undercarriage into the terminal, and then we all know what happened. Half the terminal building went on fire, massive explosions, etc. Why I got involved in that project was because we then, the Airport Authority in Ireland, we bid with an international consortium on the renovation, the planning, and opening up of the operation of the new terminal building. And that, when we were doing that, that really brought in incredible standards of how this cannot happen again, both nationally within Germany and European-wide and beyond. And so I've worked in the aviation industry, and there's a saying in the aviation industry that has come from ICAO, which is the International Aviation Civil Organization, and also the FAA, which is the US Federal Aviation, that all standards and regulations are written in blood. And when you think about that, it's so true, because we only introduce really good standards and really hard-hitting standards and practice and procedures when there's issues, when human health, human life comes into operation. And I think that's a really good saying, and it holds true, particularly within the aviation industry today, and it should hold true within every industry. So that's kind of my introduction to standards. So me, who I am, I'm an urban and transport planner, urban economist, data analyst, and the work that we do really brings in standards and rules and regulations every day, because we're dealing with humans, citizen-centric, so it's very important that we have good procedures and standards. So in terms of peers then, peers is we're building on previous standards, previous better practice, and previous work to really bring this forward. Okay, so the objective of peers, and I have to let you know, we had our kickoff meeting with our project officer in Brussels last week, and it was an excellent event. So some of these slides are hot off the press from that kickoff meeting, because we had really good interaction, we had really good cooperation with the project officer, and got really some good direction. So some of these slides have even been rewritten since that event last week. So the objective of peers is to advance and reinforce existing policy through practitioner-driven, pre-normative standardization processes. And it's all about developing and enhancing European better practice ecosystems. And I really stress that word, better practice, which has come from no fear. I think it's a great word to use, because you're not saying it's best practice, because best practice means you can do no more. Better practice means you can advance it all the time and make it better for citizens, for end users, for the community. So I think better practice is a really good everyday working word. The project aims to support the effective strengthening of preparedness and response within that resilience cycle, and I'll come back to that resilience cycle, in the field of disaster risk resilience, CBRNE, through standardization. The ecosystem brings together European disaster risk management, from natural disasters, CBRNE, and again, through working with European research policymakers, societal stakeholders, and those bodies, and again, the stakeholders to strengthen European resilience against all hazards. And to do that, we need comprehensive engagement and consultation. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day, is engagement and consultation. And the resilience cycle is really important within that space. You know, you plan, you recover, you mitigate, and you prepare. It's so important, that resilience cycle. And that resilience cycle is coming through in every day, and it's actually a shift on from what used to be the sustainability cycle. We're in this resilience cycle now, which is really excellent, that we're building on that knowledge all the time. And I want to touch back on our first presenter's note this morning, with an excellent presentation where our colleague from NEN mentioned the 3 principles of standardization. And I actually noted them down. I thought it was really excellent. So it's the involvement of all parties, number 1. 2 is the consensus. And 3 is transparency. So those 3 principles. And I actually add a 4th, and I didn't come across or make up this today. It actually came from Patricia, where Patricia said, she used the word harmonization. And harmonization is so important. And it really brings those 3 principles together. So this is what Peers is trying to achieve, is those 4 principles. So the project aims to create a database of a large range of standardization products, including formal ones, and we've heard many formal ones today, and even informal ones or less formal ones, you know, through the SEN workshop agreements, etc. We want to provide a signpost of knowledge repositories. So we don't want to write new standards, but we're here to make available that database of existing standards, and linked to that is where there's gaps in those, where we can actually ask the network of practitioners how we, through collaboration and consultation, can fill those gaps. So again, it's about looking at standards that are accredited, and again, our old friend here, the face mask, and I've learned an awful lot about face masks this morning. I really have, and I thought it was really interesting, even the different names and numbers of them. So again, it's practitioner trialed, and again, looking at to and with the practitioners, the professionals, to look at this gap analysis. It's about e-learning and gamification. So using our platform, using our database as a game to really look at that gap analysis and advancement of what we need to look at in terms of standards. And again, looking at an approach for the entry into the standardization process. And again, coming back to those better guides all the time. So in a sentence, in one sentence, if someone was to ask you, or someone was to ask one of your relatives who has nothing got to do with standardization, what is the peers ecosystem about? It will represent a radical change in how standards in disaster risk management are presently produced and understood. And again, making it simple, digestible, and understandable. That is the key. We have some fantastic partners within our consortium. Some are here today, some are online, but it's really, really exciting space where we're in. And it's an opportunity for us to work together, to work with our stakeholder group, our stakeholder clusters. So the building blocks of peers is a concept to realize through agile co-creation and engagement, to process primarily within the disaster risk space, policymakers, practitioners, and developers. So it's working in close collaboration, what we call the primary targeted community. And those particularly are clusters, community groups, and end user communities. So that's who we're saying they are. We're building this. We don't know exactly the whole remit of those, who will be, the full number, but it's very open, very engaging, and we want to welcome anybody into that, what we call this community. It's an enabler, and the system, the ecosystem will be an enabler, which will support a framework of technologies and community and expertise-based governance. Again, building on existing platforms, again, through the projects here that we're talking about today, and other projects. And here are some of the projects that will help us form the building blocks. I'm not going to go through all of these. Most of you will know these inside out. But there's 4 in particular. So there's the Safer Security project that we were very lucky to be involved previously over the last 3 years. There's the No Fear project that we're all here discussing today, and what an excellent event. There's the Driver Plus project. Again, that was a massive European Innovation Action project. And from that came the CMINE network, which is absolutely a fantastic opportunity to engage with, and I'll come back to that. And then there's Copernicus. Again, looking at the space, the platform within that space, and particularly looking at fire and forest fire. Might be a difficult slide to read in detail, but basically what this is saying is there's inputs and outputs into the ecosystem architecture. Again, the inputs are community-based and are project-based. So the community-based is obviously the stakeholders, the clusters, the end users, and then the project-based is looking at the building blocks, the research and innovation within our projects, and looking at the strategic research and building up that gap analysis to fulfill our ecosystem platform development. And from that will be the delivery of the peers ecosystem. Again, looking at better practice standardization within our cluster community. The ecosystem, you can almost, and it was mentioned earlier today, within when our gentleman from Italy talked about the filter, I was thinking of this filter, and it was really interesting how people use different filters in different terminologies in different ways. And this is our filter, our peers ecosystem filter. So focusing on the components to come up with our ecosystem, looking at what are the elements of that component, what's our foresight, engagement, and our stakeholder community. Bringing those together, as I said, in co-creation, in a targeted community, that has to be agile. Again, that's tested within our philosophy of listen, learn, extract, and show, and obviously then develop. And then looking at the policymakers, looking at our national, regional, and international organisations and authorities. Again, relating to other ongoing and completed EU projects. And again, looking at the bodies who've got the real expertise in that and bringing it together within our network of practitioners. And again, the target community inputs will be collated and synthesized within this ecosystem of peers. Again, that involves resilience and the related platforms within the resilience space to come up with a really user-friendly gamification e-learning tool. Again, all about better practice. So the clusters of communities involvement at who we see, and this will build, this will absolutely build. So we have the community for European Research and Innovation of Society, DG Home, the No Fear, for example, within that, DG ECHO, DG GROW, the Resilience Network, our Advisors Network, RAN, who are a partner as well within our project, CMINE I've mentioned, SEN, ISO, you know, so it's really the big players are there, but also the organizations, the network that we don't know about yet, that we want to learn, that we want in that ecosystem of discussion for the Peers project to really deliver. And I mentioned the foresight engagement flow, and there's 4 elements to that. So it's the knowledge, define, show, evaluate. And it's bringing all those 4 strands and those 4 themes together to deliver this ecosystem and use case-based assessment within our platform that is again, it's community cluster based. So really learning from the community, from the people on the ground, from the people who are delivering on a day-to-day basis, and understanding their needs, their requirements, and what standards needs to be advanced. So the flow of this foresight engagement at the core of peers and our ecosystem is to strengthen our member state resilience and Europe's largely fragmented disaster risk resilience community. Again, building our ecosystem, working with CMINE and No Fear within our Best Practice Guide initiative, identifying the needs and gaps of standardization, and all about innovation and research, but really evidence-based, practice-based research, and moving that forward to the next level. And in a nutshell, then, to wrap it all up, in terms of the scale and significance of this ecosystem of peers, is to provide a more targeted, relevant, coordinated, and efficient decision-making process and ecosystem within that is really cost-effective, particularly within the requirements of the European Commission. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for William?
All the hard questions can go to my partners, and they're the experts. I will take the easy questions.
This one is for you. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
For the great presentation. I think it was very useful to hear what the Peers project is doing and also the landscape of all various European projects and how they interrelate. So for me personally, it was very useful. So thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the panel discussion. What we need to do now is build up a little bit. We have to put the tables over here. So I think that just checking with Stephen, if that's okay, if we put the tables there, and maybe everybody gets a coffee, and then we start with the panel discussion. Great. All right, so I think that maybe 15 minutes, and then we start up again. Jonathan, I think that I will hand over to you here, Stephen.
Great. Jonathan and David, you can hear us loud and clear? Great. Hopefully.
To call me Jonathan since my mother did 40 years ago.
Great.
It's John.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for sticking with us. You're very welcome to the final session in this afternoon's No Fear workshop, Standardisation, Tonic for Transition. So very conscious that I and we are all that's holding you from your next port of call, whether the airport or social or closing your business day and so on. So we'll try and keep this session moving. I can't claim to have coined the title of this session, Tonic for Transition. Generally would only use tonic if I'm ordering drinks at a bar for gin and tonic or something like this, but I think it does aptly reflect the conversation we want to have today with our stellar lineup on today's roundtable in the context of standardization, where it's at, learning from this morning's discussions and presentations, dialogue at the coffee breaks and lunch break, and where things need to go and what change would have great benefit. As a quick intro, I'm Stephen Purcell. I jointly lead the Future Analytics team within KPMG in Ireland. My colleague, Professor Billy Hines, presented a little earlier. So as far as my background goes, I'm a regional and urban planner and a chartered surveyor. I have had participation since the 7th Framework Programme, Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe, and in recent years in some of the DG funding calls. A lot of our experience in research, as Billy mentioned earlier, has been in the area of healthcare, has been in the area of disaster resilience, emergency management, urban and critical infrastructure resilience has been a big theme. So within the government and infrastructure team within KPMG Ireland, that contribution in a particularly regulated space in an industry as a practitioner and as a researcher, this interaction or interface with standards is really key. I'm the first to flag I'm not an expert in standards. Certainly have a level of imposter syndrome with our experts on the round table, but I'm delighted to have the opportunity to moderate this session. Billy had mentioned we were a contractor, essentially a partner on the Stair for Security project in recent years, and having just commenced the coordination role, it's on the Peers project. It's an exciting position and opportunity. We have some of our partners present today and some of our recent collaborators with us, which is great. So to jump into it just briefly on logistics, I'm going to pose the first question, and to keep things moving, going to ask each of the roundtable panelists to introduce themselves, maybe just to touch on their experiences to date in the context of standardization and where the standards arena sits. So I'll move for the first question to each panelist, and thereafter we have a couple of questions just to keep the conversation moving, which I might pose to 2 or 3 of our panelists in each instance. I'd be really keen if there are any questions from the floor, maybe raise a hand, or we'll check in every so often just to see. And indeed, if any of our attendees joining us remotely this afternoon have questions, we'll check in with Alex on the questions log. So without further ado, the first question I'd like to put to the audience and to our panelists: should standards be trusted? So a little context there. We've spoken a little earlier today around them being voluntary, consensus-based, the role they have in industrial progress in terms of global commerce, in terms of health, safety, and our environment. Hugely important, fundamental across the board. But are there shortcomings in this space that undermine trust? Do they always result in quality, peace of mind for consumers and so on? And how do they complement on regulation? So perhaps as a first piece, should standards be trusted? And maybe to preempt it with a short intro from each panelist. I'll go from near to far, if that's okay, Isabel.
Hello again, I'm Isabelle Mélier. I'm a senior police officer, so the standardization experience I have had is more on internal security, standardization, communication standardizations that on DRS standardization. Nevertheless, I think that the core issue is the same for all our domain. And regarding the trust we can have in standards, for me, as it's a joint work, and we finally reach a consensus. For me, standards could build trust. It's an ongoing process, whatever, for the standards not to be outdated and the trust being still there at the end. The cooperation, the co-creation with all the stakeholders is the keys for trust for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Patricia.
Well, I'm a French police commissioner. I work for French Ministry of Interior. I've been working along in the intelligence business, also for NATO. And I'm also a crisis management expert, and this is how I got into standardization. And I currently share the CNTC 391 Social and Citizen Security. Regarding the question that you asked, should standards be trusted? I should say yes, of course, but you don't have to like them. If you can, they're voluntary, so you can not use them if you don't like them. But if you think you would need something that you trust and that's better, well, you can either do another standard that fits or ask for a revision and have something that is suitable for what you need. If you can convince the other experts of the relevance of your remarks, it's open to you. So yes, you should trust standards because they're very strong achievements built on knowledge and consensus.
Thank you. Stephanie.
My name is Stefanie Jansen, and I'm the manager of the Department of Healthcare, Consumer Products and Society here at NEN. So welcome into our building, and with our colleagues here, well done. Thank you for the organization of these, I think, 2 days, more or less.
Yeah.
I have already experienced for 14 years in standard, which of more than 10 years in PPE, personal protective equipment. Should standard be trusted? Yes, I think so, but they're not the holy grail. There are options. You can use something else, but I think standards are a really good basis to start for your processes.
Thanks, Stephanie. John, maybe I can hand over the same question to yourself. Should standards be trusted? With a short intro, if that's okay.
I'm so sorry. You see, this is a standard system, and I've just failed the application test. I do apologise. My name's John. I'm a fire officer and a civil protection responder by trade, and more recently run a group of civil protection experts that work across Europe, and in this context actually work more into Horizon Europe and other research projects from the practitioner side. So a couple of perspectives about whether we trust standards. What I was saying while I was muted was never trust the standard, because the standard doesn't apply anything. So you can have the best specified standard in the world, but if somebody uses the product or outcome wrongly, then you'd be silly to trust it. So the standard is a vital foundation, but it doesn't necessarily relate to the final application. So understand the context of a standard, I guess. Two very quick stories. One, firefighters used to wear plastic leggings. They used to have trousers made of PVC, which were really good until you went near a fire, when, funnily enough, they melted. Now, they were all to a standard. They were to a British standard, which actually then became part of an EN standard. I'm going back 25 years now. So the standard wasn't wrong. It was a very good standard, as long as you didn't take them anywhere near a fire. And then there's one final story, is a machine called a forklift truck that we use for moving heavy equipment on fire incidents. And one day we had to use it to bring out a very overweight casualty from the 3rd floor of a building. So we lifted it up on a platform and then used it to pierce the outside of the building and lift this unfortunately obese casualty to the ground. Now, that saved his life, but we were using it so far outside of the parameters of any standard that was ever written to that vehicle that the standard, again, was fairly irrelevant. But it's a starting point, it's a secure foundation, and you understand the parameters within which things can operate. So important, but not necessarily trustworthy in their own right, if that makes sense. You see, now you wish I'd stayed muted.
John, no, that's a very interesting perspective. Maybe David, as an intro, and to put the same question to yourself, reflecting on the responses so far from our roundtable.
Yeah, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So my name is David Crouch. I work for 3M in their global defense and public safety arena. So my background, I've been a CBRN specialist for more than a quarter of a century now. I've been a practitioner in terms of mitigator at the end use. I've been a science and technology developer, and more recently, in the last 10 or 15 years, I've been involved in both standards development at the kind of the product level, whether within respiratory protection or decontamination, but also more recently as convener of Working Group 2 within Patricia's TC391, of developing societal and citizen security standards. So to the question, should you trust standards? I think the fundamental answer is yes. But again, to take John's caveat, it depends which standards we're talking about. If we're talking about individual item standards, so self-contained breathing apparatus, etc., their standards are designed there to make sure that the standards are there to make sure that the end use product is safe to use and it's applicable to what its intended application is. So in more recent times, especially with the advent of higher level ISO standards, they're very much trustworthy. And again, when we're starting to move to the higher level application, societal and citizen security, I think we trying to stovepipe them into calling them standards when they're not. The more appropriate term in my world, my vocabulary, is guidance. So I will use CBRN as an area. Standards in this area become guidance because the events happen so infrequently, they're difficult to model and map out. However, the lessons learned, because they're such high risk, high threat environments, I think anything we can do to provide guidance around these events to prevent them from happening to the same scale as previously, so that you're generating a more resilient society. So in that respect, we have standards of individual componentry and then guidance at a higher level. But again, they're all designed to be trustworthy because they're there to protect society as a whole. So that's kind of my initial thoughts on the subject.
David, just lending itself into that space then around, and not to take it into a technical tone, but in that citizen security and safety, or indeed CBRN perspective, is a CWA, like a CEN work agreement, is it a standard? Officially, it's not a standard. It's perhaps given a different definition. But is it the right way to go in terms of developing standards? And are there shortcomings in terms of the risk for fragmentation in terms of how things develop? As I say, I don't want to go too heavy into the technical aspect, but perhaps it's one initially, Patricia, I could perhaps put to you from your extensive experiences, and then wider to the floor.
Well, I can only speak for what I do, which is social and citizen security standards, or security and resilience standards within ISO. As I said, we're dealing with the policies. So CWAs, there are deliverables from research projects, So you have the staff of the research project, the consortium, working on the topic that they choose. Then they would ask us what we think, and it's overwhelming. People seem to believe that they can throw at us, lists of, Christmas lists. I would like this, I would like that. What do you think? We don't have time for this. And sometimes we don't even understand what they mean, you see? And then when we end up telling them, well, you're not even using the right language, so there's no way we can use what you're doing. Or even when we say, hey guys, look, this standard already exists. Such as our Bible that I mentioned, ISO EN 223,000. Well, there was CW1 terminology, that was not even business oriented. That was research. Nobody's going to use this. And what is more fundamental than language when you develop standards? Another example was we have an ISO EN 22329 using social media in an emergency. There was a standard on people who never manage a crisis, telling us how to use them, what we should put in the messages, not even understanding the crisis management culture. We deal with everything that happens, during this event. Oh, we learn from everything. I mean, the Belgians, for instance, learned a lot from the terror attacks we had in Paris. The police, as well as the public, understood that there were things that they should not be doing, you see, and this was not even taken into account by the people who would lecture us, and that was CWA. We told them, well, you don't touch this. If you have something to bring in, join the working group. Tell them you want revision because you have some added value to bring in. If you can convince them, you will get your say, and you know what? They think that what they do is equivalent to a standard. I mean, sometimes things have to be said. CWA should not interfere in policies, and So most of the pre-standardization work that I mentioned is done within the working groups, the technical committees, because the experts are there. They think thoroughly, they know the environment, that standardization environment, and they build and understand we need this brick, but we would need this brick before the other brick, you see. This is how we proceed. There are other means. We can also use the outcomes of research projects that are not CWAs, but best guidelines, best practices, the ones that you did, the ones that DERNet did, ILEANet did, those are ready for standardization, really. Or we can use the best practice guide, which, as I mentioned, is a very clever thing, a very clever way to get your ideas in shape in order to have something that can move on quickly to standardization. There's another problem also with CWAs, is that it has to be managed by staff from NSBs. There's a difference when you develop standards, standards are developed by experts within a framework. The framework is provided by NSBs, national standardization bodies, and European standardization bodies, or international standardization bodies. You have to make a difference between the staff and the experts within the working groups. The staff don't have the expertise. They have they can support the work, They know a lot. They're very useful. But I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to tell you what to do. So yes, that's a problem when a CWA is managed by someone who is not an expert. You see. So no, I don't think CWAs are for what I do. I think CWAs should be excluded. And by the way, another reason is that it's too much. I mean, we are asked questions all the time. It's overwhelming. It's too much. Sometimes don't even look at them.
Context, even from my own experiences. So I've had that vice chair role with the interest group in citizen societal security with the National Standards Authority of Ireland, deputising to Tom Flynn of TFC Research and Innovation, who, as we know, was unable to attend, unfortunately. But in a lot of that conversation in an Irish context, and I'm curious if it's a common piece, we speak of the Better Practice Guide, and is that a route towards a complementary alternative or supplement to existing practice to bring in the first responders, the practitioners, to complement the subject matter expertise that you find in this room and across the standard space? Is that something maybe, John, you could touch on from your network and so on?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think all the speakers are highlighting the difference between a standard and the need for guidance. And if the two start to mix, then we really have problems, don't we? And I think perhaps the CWA arrangements are a great example of a forum where context can be discussed and pre-standardisation can be discussed. But at the moment, it carries a name that is vaguely similar to a standard body setting name. You start to get confusion. Is it a pre-standard? No, it's not. I've been part of CWAs. They're not a pre-standardisation activity at all. They're a great opportunity to discuss and to understand context, but they're not actually directly related to the standard environment. But coming back to my earlier example, when you have a standard that how a forklift truck operates, that's a vital standard. You also need guidance on the parameters within which you can use it, and that's guidance. But the day somebody discussing guidance thinks they're creating a new standard, they fundamentally misunderstood what's going on. So more better practice guides, more guidance documents, more guidance work, but we really mustn't confuse it with the stating process.
Maybe if there are any comments from the floor or experiences in the context of practitioner participation in this space, or don't know, Alex, if there's anything from the remote attendees as yet. I just jump in at any point if you wish to provide comment. Maybe just to keep it moving then around, perhaps one I can put to yourself, Stephanie, in the context of finding this balance between something we were exploring around an open, transparent model that's looking to be low cost and accessible versus something that's perhaps closed or feels a little closed. And I don't know if that's an image problem or a perception or whatever else, but feels closed and expensive to deliver upon. Is there anything there from your experiences that can look to comment on that balance being struck?
And that in relation to the standardization process? Yeah, I think standardization should be as open as necessary. It's an open, transparent process. Everybody is able to participate. The system works via the national standardization bodies. We know that not every national standardization body operates in the same way, but at least there is one rule: it should be open to everyone, and everyone should be able to participate. And how you organize that on a national level might be different in the countries. So there might be a national committee, or that follows the work on, for example, European or international level, but there can also be just a couple of experts that really want to participate on European and international level. And I also think that maybe related to the question before, what is the goal of the publication that you want to make? do you want to have something that can be a starting point for something else? Or do you want to have it for 120% perfect, so it can be really trusted? So you have a kind of different deliverables that in the end are used differently, and that's okay. But you should discuss before with all your stakeholders what is necessary for the market and for your business.
David, could I bring you in on similar in that context around, obviously you've very extensive experience from industry and participation in standards and standards development. That piece of finding a balance of, you know, an established process and that going about it in the right way, but looking to encourage participation from the right audience or the right participants in a space.
So yeah, very much so. I mean, from my experience, and just to echo John's thoughts on CWAs have their place, and I look at them as a kind of a gaps analysis. So you're at the individual CWA level, you're looking at a particular problem space, but it might take many different CWAs to add up to a full standard or a full guidance document, depending on the application. And again, the CWAs shouldn't be undertaken in isolation of the standards committee or body or organization. So everybody's communicating together, because without the practitioner community, you cannot validate any major assumptions around generating standards. So I can happily say I've been an academic, I've been an industrialist, and I've been an end user. So without all three of those matrices, you cannot generate a full standard in its entirety without interplaying all those relevant parts. So I will, again, using kind of disaster resilience or CBRN as examples, you need the practitioner community to validate the assumptions from the standards committee, and that's why they are so important. But at the same time, you need the technical experts in there to say what is the art of the possible. So they're all interlinked, but it all comes back to that fundamental important question around communication. So if people are using CWAs, they need to make sure that the relevant standards committee is aware of that CWA so they can support throughout its entirety to make sure that any standards committee is aware of the longs, because some CWAs can be several years, if not longer. And again, without that horizon scanning, what happens is, which Patricia eloquently alluded to, is that you just get bombarded as a convener with lots of CWAs saying you must standardize this. And because it's run on a voluntary basis, most of the time you won't have the time, the bandwidth, or the team to look at the vast majority of CWAs that often go under the radar.
Thank you. And Patricia, is there anything there around that point, just around encouraging practitioner participation in, you know, developing newly required standards from your experiences? Are there barriers, further barriers that you've identified in your experiences that could be tackled? Is it down to things like the Better Practice Guide and looking at complementary or other initiatives running in parallel to development of formal standards?
Yes, there are many barriers. I think the bigger barrier is that people don't exactly know standards and how useful they can be. They don't know that it's completely open and that they can participate, and that's, you know. The other problem, I think, is the business model of standardization at national and European level. I think it is counterproductive. It's the only business where you have to pay to be allowed to work. You have to pay for your travels expenses to attend the meetings, and then when the work is done, you have to pay to buy the results. I mean, we have to do something about it, you know? That really is an issue. But then there are clever people who have found out that it's a very good idea anyway to invest in standards, and who make this effort. Because it's not, at the end, it's not just about talking about, oh, that would be interesting if we could do this and this and that. It's about, hey, let's do it. The Germans are very good at standardization, and what they do, especially the ones in the industry, say you hold the standard, you hold the market, and that's absolutely true. You see, so yes, it's worth it, even if it's perceived as a complicated process and so on. It's very worth it. So first, when people understand their interests, yes, they get involved when they get to know what other barriers. Well, there are many other barriers. People don't know that there are standards in their business, and that they should get involved. So we should improve this knowledge. What else? We should develop initiatives such as Stand ICT, so that people who are willing to participate are able to get some funding. There's also something that is polluting standardization. It's CWA processes, because people believe that they should get funded for what they do. I'm not getting paid, I'm not developing standards, so I'm doing a CWA. Oh yes, but you're doing nothing. I mean, we have zero result. We have zero fast track procedures, zero. So you'd rather be funded for something that's probably not going anywhere, instead of getting involved. I say, yes, but I don't get funding. If I don't get funding for standardization, no, you have to think differently. You have to play by the rules. And there was something else that I wanted to say. There's another obstacle, which is very important one. It's the language. This continent has a tremendous number of high-level experts in every field, wonderful people. Most of them don't speak English well enough to be able to interact. So this is also a barrier.
Isabel, you gave a presentation in an earlier session today, which was very interesting. And as I was doing a little bit of preparatory homework or whatever for this afternoon session, I came across a project which I wasn't a participant on, but called the Encircle study, a research project which I think concluded perhaps late last year. Some of their findings were talking around, standards being considered outdated perhaps and not suited to current capabilities, and this kind of question around a standard as a point in time and how it might evolve and so on. Maybe from a practical perspective, a few thoughts on the adequacy of standards in your area.
As earlier explained, standards have to be drawn by stakeholders, could be practitioners, could be also at policy level, to be accepted and to be spread. But in fact, we really need to begin from a core stone. In the internal security area, we are working mainly on the basis of best practices exchanges. Could be in forensic, for example. I will give you. I used to be forensic expert in France a certain time ago, and as you might know, in France you have two police forces: the national police and the gendarmerie nationale. And the justice could be, in the first time, give the forensic expertise to the police, and the second step expertise to the gendarmerie. And I was working with my colleagues from gendarmerie because we had a barrier. We didn't know how the other police force was working on the forensic expertise, the different steps they had. So we work on best practices guides to give to all the forensic experts, either from police or gendarmerie, to know how to take the new expertise, knowing how it has been done in the previous step. And we, for different topics, we use how we use the experience, how the best practices has been changed and adopted by the different forces, and that a first step to make a sort of proposal of standardization for a topic. Because on the other side, I have the experience of topics that have been brought up for standardization, and they have not been really accepted because they were not from bottom up, and people didn't accept it, and we still struggle with exchanges because the different forces, but also the customs, because the customs are also common issues with us, could be illicit trafficking of tobacco, of weapons, cultural goods, but also smuggling. And we need to have a core language, we need to have a core methodology, and for us, the standardization begins for sure at the level of being able to have a common language. And it seems so easier to say that, but in the real life, it's not exactly the case.
Yeah, thanks, Isabel. And that sort of sits quite well with a conversation we had during the coffee break. So Dr. Peter Daly was present a little earlier. Unfortunately, had to depart unexpectedly. But as a career expert in emergency management and working with the Health Service Executive in Ireland and the Irish Centre for Emergency Management, I was just looking to pick his brain in a sense around in that space. That piece around a common language and a need. So there was a project we were involved with a few years ago. It was coordinated by Dr. Cara Neville in University College Cork in Ireland, but it was called S-Help, and it was looking at the health space and emergency management and moving towards a common taxonomy and a common language in terms of cross-border and what's consistent across member states and so on. And even as seemingly simple matters in terms of triage and color coding of the level of severity. So where you might have in some instances, if I could call it a traffic light system, a red, amber, green model, whereas in other instances the black coloring might indicate another level of severity and so on. And just this commonality, irrespective of whether it's emergency management or health or other spaces, that challenge of a common language seems to be quite prevalent. And looking at some of the literature then around the health space and maybe a resistance or a difficulty in trying to bring that through, is that something that permeates throughout each sector, or are there experiences perhaps that the panelists might have identified around how we can help to solve some of that challenge? Maybe it's one I could ask Stephanie to touch on in the first instance and open it up to the floor.
Can you repeat it again in
Yes, yeah, it was a long-winded ramble, but essentially around the difficulty in defining a common language and moving towards a common discourse of defining key terminology and to bring that to a subset of words that are commonly interpreted or consistently interpreted. Is that something you've come across within any of those specialisms, and maybe are there some learnings we could take from today?
It's necessary to have a common language in your standards, because when you don't have it, you don't talk about the same topic and you don't understand it in the same way. So it's very essential that you have it. That's, for instance, ISO has the online browsing platform. It's the online library of all the terms and definitions that are used in ISO standards. And there you can see that also in standards, not every term has the same definition, but you really need to have the same understanding of what you're talking about. So it's not the sexiest topic to talk about in your process, but I think that's also one of the jobs for the national standardization bodies and the secretaries that are guiding the process of standardization, to keep on track that you have the same language and you talk about the same topics. And every discussion brings back to the baseline and say, what is what you want? What is what you need? What is your goal?
Tricia, please.
There's a process for You agree on, okay, what are we talking about? When everybody agrees on what we're talking about, then you decide how we're going to name it. Otherwise, it's unsolvable. Then you can build. Otherwise, you keep reinventing the wheel, turning around. It's like the foundation for a house.
Very good, very good.
If I may have
Please,
something
Isabel.
regarding the common language, I've spoken common language among law enforcement agency, but we can imagine in a crisis then when first practitioners could be a crash, could be railway big accident, could be a natural disaster, when you have police, law enforcement agency, when you have emergency services, we have a total different language. So that's also the main add value also for crisis management standards, because at this level we can get a common language, perhaps at a strategic level, not to have misunderstandings that can lead to a big issue on the ground.
When you look at standardization, one is the terms and the definition. One other very important topic is the scope of your standard. So that is your result. What are you talking about? And to guide your discussions during the process, it's very important to keep on track. What are the limits? What is part of the standard and what is not? Because when you don't set the boundaries, you keep on discussing forever.
And maybe, John, just to put that to yourself and maybe just to develop it a little around standardization versus flexibility. So like for, a crisis situation where there's inherently a need for agility or the need to react to unforeseen and moving dialogue and so on. Maybe some comments from yourself in that capacity?
Yeah, sure. I think we're bringing a few subjects together here now, aren't we? And we've spoken about the accessibility of standardisation to practitioners and are there barriers in place. And I think we keep tripping over this issue about the difference between a standard and its application. And of course, the application in our world, whether that's medical emergencies or search and rescue or BRN, has to be agile. It can't be rooted in a decision that was taken in a standardisation committee 3 years ago. It has to be understood and usable by those that understand the application side of the business. I think we've just done an exercise and we've just handed it over to UNDRR, funnily enough, under the Sendai arrangements, of creating a lexicography, a taxonomy, if you will, a glossary of terms for societal resilience, for disaster resilience. And we used about 10 projects, Horizon Europe projects, to try and work on single definitions for some very common phrases that are used in DRR. And the most common one, the easiest one to use as an example, is the word resilience. So there's been super work done on defining resilience, and we now almost have a standard of what does resilience mean within the UNDRR taxonomy. However, when we went to each of the projects that we worked with, every single one was using the term resilience in a different context and had almost by default invented a new definition for it. So we are on the fact that actually the most important thing was to understand its origin, understand what resilience is meant to mean, and then by all means use it slightly differently in a different context, but record the fact you're doing it and understand the safety barriers around how you're using it. So I think this idea of commonality and of standardization of everything is a vital foundation, but then practitioners need to understand enough about it to be able to apply it in a dynamic and different context. So standardization goes so far, but an understanding of what that standard means is actually more important, and the same for definitions and terms.
This is a similar view held, or any further comments?
I just to echo John's points. I think the name is in the title, standardization. It's around common language. Stephanie and Isabel mentioned it around that ISO have libraries of standard definitions, and whether you're a fireman or a policeman or a microbiologist or a chemist, which I am, if you're talking about resilience operations, which here in my world we are, then if everybody has a common understandings of the basics, it means you are inherently by rights developing a more resilient structure, because everybody's starting from the same understanding. Yes, as John is really well put around, you might have such subtle little differences at the application level, but if everybody's coming from a common platform, you're inherently building that flexibility into the system, because there's no confusion around what does this actually mean, because the definitions have been defined within, whether it's guidance, whether it's a sort of full standard, but the guidance, the terminology is unilateral, so that people are coming in the same direction in terms of providing that resilient society.
Thanks very much for those contributions. Maybe I could just do a sense check on the remote participation, if there are any questions, or indeed from the floor. Our opportunity to put it to the experts would be much welcomed.
Yeah, could you guys enable the mic? Yeah, so we've had a question from Irma about the health of the standardization field. It's not targeted to anyone, so anyone who wants to chip in. A couple of the speakers mentioned today that there's a lack of young experts participating in standardization. Any ideas for the reasons behind that?
Any takers in the first instance?
About getting involved, and that everybody's welcome, really. Even young people can be really good experts, and we need new blood, so we have to learn how to attract them, and these people usually are busy with their work or their research and so on and so forth, and maybe they cannot use some of their time to get involved, or maybe they would like to get involved, but their boss doesn't understand how interesting it could be for the company. There could be many reasons.
David, I saw your hand go up. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, just to echo Patricia's points. We often think of an expert as someone with grey hair and glasses and a kind of lab coat with many decades of expertise, which, yes, there is that element of it, but I always think that it's great to get the younger generation involved, because we're helping to define their future, and often younger eyes will see things differently from, say, I don't want to say entrenched, but a more established view of the world. So the more pairs of eyes we can get involved in standardization, then the more applicable the process will be. So yes, I'm very much, especially in the STEM, the science and technology and engineering space, the more people we can get involved in standardization, I think it can only be a good thing.
John, your hand was raised as well. Any further comment?
Just around accessibility of the standardization process. So we've heard a lot of confusing language used, because the whole environment of standardization is actually quite confusing. So things like SEN workshop agreements, and understanding that actually they are pretty much open to all if you know about them. You can join a workshop agreement if you know about it. Having that accessibility to workshops around standards may well open some doors. At the moment, I don't think amongst practitioners in my field of expertise, I don't think there's any understanding at all of how standardization works. and even less of how they might engage in it. So I think there's in the discussions we're having about the confusing nature of some of the components of standardization is also a huge marketing requirement on the world of standardization to make it more inclusive, to open it up, and to get practitioners more involved. I wish I had an answer, but I'm hoping that projects like Peers will to produce some answers. If it can start to describe a journey towards a new standard or correcting an old standard or updating it, then I think that will be a great opportunity to engage and become more accessible for practitioners. Thank you.
I see a hand raised on the floor, a familiar face. Yeah, my colleague Billy.
Yeah, I live with 4 fairly young people from 26 down to 19. And one thing that I've realized is they have very little time, or want to really spend very little time on reading. They don't want to read documents, long text. What they're really interested is in gamification. And if you want to get, I feel, if you want to get young people involved in the standards, you've got to make it interesting, exciting, and really gamify the issues or the standards or whatever, and then you might see good interaction, because it's what they want. They want quick wins, quick outputs. They don't want to. They're reading enough text and stuff in college or whatever. It's real fast, quick turnarounds.
And a slight segue, but in my own experiences with some of our research, from a planning perspective, the importance of getting young voices to participate in envisioning the future of their settlements or regional strategies and so on. We embarked on some of these future leaders events where we'd go into secondary schools, we'd workshop with transition year students and so on. And the richness of insight from them and the innovation from them is unparalleled, you know, and it's so important to try and nurture that and bring it through in any walk of life or any development. Stephanie, please.
Yeah, maybe also some experience we have here in our company. It also depends on the topic where you're talking about. When it's really technical, you need some experience before you get some expertise. But when you talk about, for instance, circularity or circularity building or energy performance of buildings, it's more attractive, especially when you put it in another process of discussion. So make it shorter, other milestones, other kind of deliverables. So that makes it more attractive to participate. And for instance, here, maybe you've heard last night, we have a big technical university here in the city. And on a lot of universities and a lot of high schools, we give presentations or participate with students to already introduce them to the facts of standardization. What is it? So when they hear it later on, when they're working, they remember that they've done something in the past with it.
Thank you. Please, yeah, in the front.
Yeah, I want to add another thought to the discussion about standards and a common language. I don't know if you are familiar with the concept of a boundary object. So there's a lot of research since 30 years on this concept of a boundary object. A boundary object can be a term which everyone has a common idea of, but a term which is very flexible. It can be used by everyone. And a very famous example is the term resilience. And it was just mentioned that every scientist from different disciplines has psychologists, ecologists, engineers, sociologists, I'm a sociologist, have a different understanding of resilience, disaster resilience, yeah, and it was already mentioned. And the thing is, what is typical for a boundary object, yeah, which is different understood, which is very flexible, but with a common idea, is that it facilitates talking, discussion, communication among or across boundaries. That's why it's called the boundary object. Yeah? It facilitates that disciplines can communicate with each other. And what comes into play is with standardization that this quality is lost. Yeah? In the moment when you standardize or try to standardize such a flexible understanding, you narrow down the idea of this concept. And okay, we might have all the same conception then, but this is very narrow, very technical, and the exchange of ideas between scientific disciplines is not able anymore. So it's not, it doesn't work anymore. So I just want to add this thought because you appreciated standardization so much. So I want to add this thought.
This is very interesting what you say. Well, sometimes you need stability, and sometimes it's an inconvenience. But my answer would be that terminology standardization, is always under revision. We publish one every 3 years, 5 years, depends on. But if you have a valuable reason for, things are not fixed. Of course, it's almost never going to fundamentally change. But if there are some nuances, if you want to bring in something more because it makes sense, you can still change it. See, so yes. I get your point, yes. And also we should be able to keep the transverse approach that is brought by the language, because that's also about common understanding. Thank you.
Floor or from the virtually, no. Maybe just as a closing piece, conscious on time and so on, I'd really like to thank our I'm going to say round table or round tables and our virtual participants for really incredible insights, and really appreciate all of your contributions. Stephanie and your wider team in NEN has been fantastic for you accommodating us throughout the day, and really appreciate that. And I think it's a great reflection on the No Fear project to have such an excellent audience and subject matter experts participating in this event. So if there are no closing reflections or comments, we'll bring it to a close, and thank you so much for your participation.
There's, of course, the... Do not forget, Stephanie also got one for you. You want another one? You've been there 2 times, so I think that is fair. There you go. Stephen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have to say I'm really impressed by the moderating skills and also the exceptionally high quality of the panelists and all the speakers. So then I would like to also once again a big applause for all the speakers that we had today. Thank you very much. Also for those of us in the call, there's a long list of people I would like to thank. But let me start with the audience. You've been with us since 10 o'clock in the morning. I think that we were double the numbers when we started. So I think that you as well are the stars of this day for being here throughout the meeting. I hope that you learned something about standardization. Then, of course, we have the audio team way in the back. They have been incredibly flexible. There were some last-minute changes. They accommodated everything, so it may be a bit stressful for them, but I think they did a tremendous job. Same can be said for Alex. He's been monitoring the chat, doing communications on the side. Then, of course, Tom Flynn, who is not with us today. I think he also deserves a special mention because he unfortunately could not come here, and there was some issue with the audio, but he's been really a driving force behind this workshop as well. So I would like to thank Tom as well. You keep on clapping, very happy with that. And then finally, of course, also our project management. Luca, maybe you also want to say a few last words before we close the meeting. There we go.
Thank you very much. I can only copy and paste what Lena said, so thank you very much. This is a very nice tool. So thank you very much to all the audience, the virtual audience, all the people here, the stakeholders of the project that comes here from all over Europe. And for sure, thank you again to Lena and Oke Yap from NEN that organized all these 2 days, and for sure to Tom Flynn that is not there, but thank you very much, Tom. And again, thank you very much, and keep on following us on our social networks and portal, Know Fear portal, and so on. Thank you very much.